Welcome back to Speed and Grease if you are a returning listener. And if it's your first episode, I appreciate you tuning in, and I hope you go and check out some of our other episodes that we have with our wonderful guests. And I hope you like them enough that you keep coming back and listening to more of them. If you haven't already, make sure to go and like and or subscribe to Speed and Grease on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you like to tune into podcasts. Help us spread the show if you can. I sure appreciate every like, every comment, every subscriber. When you guys are out there sharing the episodes and commenting on things, it sure helps spread the word of these amazing stories from our guests that we have on here, and kind of really helps keep building the whole thing. So I sure appreciate it, and thank you to every one of you that have been out there doing that. It sure means a lot. Now, I have known Royce Rossier for almost my entire life. I knew that he raced himself, whether that be in a super late model, a vintage race car, and he was also the president of the famous CWRA at a time when racing was really, really in its prime around, here in Wisconsin. But I've never really taken, a whole lot of time to ever ask Royce about any of those experiences or opportunities that he's had. And he has sure been involved in racing in a multitude of ways in and around racing. And, so it was great for me to have this opportunity to sit down and talk with him and chat about those things. And if you like to sit back and have a good laugh, all of Royce's stories will be sure to accomplish that. He has spent a lot of time being around some of the greats in racing, including one of the most famous tire salesmen and all-around great people, Albert Getzloff. He talks about the time just working for him and racing for him. And, if there's a story that involves Albert Getzloff, it's going to be a good one. So let's get into it. Royce, thank you so much for coming, and thanks for coming back up from Florida to Wisconsin to do this.
Yeah. This is a privilege. I've watched these episodes, and you're doing a great job.
I appreciate it. It's been fun. The response from people has, I've gotten responses from feedback from people that I wouldn't have expected, and
Sure.
gotten feedback I wouldn't have expected, all positive stuff. So it's been fun, and I knew I just needed to get going with it. Didn't know 100% who would all be on or how it would all go, but I just got to get going with it and make it work and just keep it rolling and listen to what people are telling you and
very good.
Keep things moving.
Very good job.
Yeah, no. So it's an honor to have you on, and I know there's things, the people that you've been friends with and involved with, things you've done. President of CWRA at one time, and there's a whole lot of stuff that I know that you did it, but I don't know a whole lot about. So
Sure.
I'm kind of excited to find out about some of those things. And but before we get into any of that, I think there's probably a lot of other people out there that maybe want to know this too. But how does one become an associate?
Well,
Do you have to own a UTV?
No, just be a good race fan. You sit with us at the stands when we're up in the stands and have a few adult beverages.
Okay.
And just be a good race fan, and we'll take care of you.
Okay. Yeah, so for anyone that follows Royce on Facebook, you definitely know about Royce Rossier and the Associates. So, and actually, I was trying to find it, and I couldn't. Years ago, I had asked you for a T-shirt, and you had the whole crew shirt made for me, and you had driver put on it.
Sure.
And I know I have it in a keepsake box, and from when I moved to a new house here, and I couldn't find it, but I'm gonna dig it up. I really wanted to wear it for this episode, but I'll wear it for somebody else's at some point.
Yeah, that was we had them shirts made. They
look good,
real professional. They looked real good.
Yeah, they did. They did.
And I got that associate name from when I was a kid, Jack Bowser and Associates.
Okay.
He was a USAC racer, raced at Milwaukee.
Okay.
And he was like the professional team, and that's what he called it himself. And so I always went with that. So.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah.
So what did you grow up right here in the central Wisconsin area then?
Yeah, I'm fourth generation in Plover.
Okay.
So my
The Rossiers have been ruling the town for
Yes,
a while.
they've been ruling that town for a long time, and grew up in Plover, right on Post Road. I don't know, there was about 400 people lived there. I can remember when I was a little kid. Now I think it's 17, 18,000. So
Okay.
yeah.
And were you going to the races in your little one, or what were you doing?
Yeah, my mom and dad were race fans.
Okay.
And there was a lot of race fans back then.
Mm-hmm.
In these towns, and Plover had a lot of race fans. We moved off Post Road. We moved on to Roosevelt, and just down the road was Bill Honecker's grandfather, Lolly Barnsdale, had a car, and just all our neighbors, all his kids all went to the races, and my parents were race fans. That's how it sort of started.
Okay. And were you into anything else as a kid besides racing?
Hockey.
Hockey, okay.
Yeah. I mean, I played all the sports. I mean, I played baseball. My dad helped get Plover Little League going.
Okay.
Way back when. So my dad managed us all in baseball. I was probably the worst baseball player in our family. So, but I played. I tell people I always played to get the pop at the end of the game, or the treats. So that's why I played baseball. But hockey, I was involved pretty heavy in hockey.
Okay.
Coached after high school. I had the 14-year-olds for, I don't know, probably 13, 14 years.
Oh, really?
So, yeah. And some of them kids became crew guys for me, and,
Okay.
So.
Yeah, it's a good recruiting. It's a good recruiting program.
It is, yeah. That worked out good. Yep.
You get the athletic ones and the fighters.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
So when did you first get in a race car? Was it hobby stocks? Did you start with, or
it was a hobby? It was a hobby stock. So
okay.
I, like I said, we were going to races, and I would pawn my way to a race any way I could.
Okay.
Cheryl West, who just passed away, she had a beauty parlor in town, and she went to a lot of races. I would go with her if my parents weren't going, and I'd go with Billy's grandfather and stuff like that. So going to the races, and I went with Albert and Vic to the races a little bit, nothing much.
Okay.
And Albert gets the tire business from Bobby Trzynski, who had it.
Okay.
So Albert gets the tire business from him, and I don't know what year that would have been, 75 maybe.
Okay.
And so that first year I wasn't old enough to get in the pits. So I would go to a couple races with him, but I'd have to go in the stands. Bob Schmelzer was running the pits back then everywhere, and he was there was rules, and you followed them.
Sure.
So I would go to the races with him. Well, that next year, so I'm thinking 76, I would have been, I think I was too young, but I think we fudged the age. But Albert, Vic was working during the days. I think he was working at Rosella and Sons. And so Albert was pretty wild back then, and he still drank. And so one time, this is right away, that started that year, and he had been out drinking, and he had a real bad gout attack.
Okay.
So he calls me to go to Appleton with him, and he said, I'm going to need an employee this year. So I said, hey, I'm going to do that. So
now, are you in high school at this time?
Oh, yeah. I'm thinking 13 or 14.
Okay.
Yeah, I was pretty young. And he picked me up to go to that first time, the real first time I was working for him. And his foot was bothering him so bad, he said, can you drive my vehicle to Appleton? And he had a 4-door Chevrolet Bel Air Impala, a sedan that pulled this trailer, and he'd get about 45, 50 tires in there with the scales, because he hauled the CWRA scales around.
Okay.
And I even at one time wrote Chevrolet a story on this car, because it ended up, I think, about 400,000 or 500,000 miles on this car.
No kidding.
And he drove it like a tank. So anyways, we're heading to Appleton. His foot's bothering me. He said, hey, do you think you could drive this car over there? I said, yeah, well, I'm not even 16, So I get behind the wheel. Well, on the way home, he said, I'll never, ever do that again. I think I made him pretty nervous. So anyways, that's how I started in that tire business.
Okay.
With him. And then, throughout that, I don't know if it was that year or the next year, he says one day, he said, well, I think you should go racing. I said, well, I don't know.
And before he said that, had you ever thought like, hey, you know what? I wouldn't mind getting behind the wheel.
I really did because, I would go to the MUSAC races with my parents, and that was just like, it was more professional and,
sure.
But I'd go to the short tracks. I really wanted to do it. So he said, Albert says we should get a car. So I'm thinking, well, that sounds like a good plan. Well, Albert, how he was, I think Boomer and Mike Miller owed him a favor. And Boomer and Mike Miller were teammates then, or Mike Miller worked in Boomer's shop.
Okay.
A lot of people don't remember.
Okay.
When Mike first moved from Minnesota,
okay,
he was in Boomer's shop.
Gotcha.
So, and all them guys, your grandfather and Dick and Boomer and Marv, they owned the pipe bender all together. And then they just, whoever needed it went and got it at the last shop.
Sure, yeah, makes sense.
So Albert picks the pipe bender, I think it was over at Dick's, and buys the pipe. And he buys this 66 Galaxy Ford, four-door Galaxy. And it had the Ford stub, which, everybody wanted.
Okay.
So we take it to Boomer, and Albert tells Mike, and he doesn't ask. He tells him, you guys are going to put the cage in this, put the bars in it. So they put me in, I think Bill Honecker helped me, and they put us to work to start gutting the car out and getting things ready. And I think Mike made a little brace for the seat, and we did all that. And so they put the cage in this car and put the bars in it. And Mike said, boy, I don't know, it's pretty rusty. The back clip is pretty rusty. He said, you're going to have to really watch it. But they beefed it up pretty good. So that was the first car. And we took it to Golden Sands. I think we pulled it by a chain, with a chain behind Albert's his Bel Air.
Cool, yeah. I've heard a lot of stories of pulling race cars with a chain.
Yeah. And, well, I got a couple but anyways, we'll stay on track here. So we get to the track. Now, I've never been on this track, or, you know what I mean? So Albert just says, well, you go on out. So I get my helmet on, strap in, and, well, if you enter Golden Sands on the track on the far south of the driveway on, the entrance on, how it just drops?
Yep.
Well, that's where I went on the track. And my stomach was about in my eyes because I thought, holy, this big bank. And so I start making laps. I'm thinking I'm flying out there, So I pulled in, and I could see Albert looks agitated. He goes, what were you doing out there? And I go, what do you mean? I said, I was flying. He goes, no. He says, you got to get up on the bank. You're too low and all this. So we checked a few things, and so I go back out. And I'm making laps again. All of a sudden, bam, I get hit in the back end. Here's Albert out on the track with that Bel Air.
No kidding.
Yeah, with his street car.
Call right up to you.
These are just street cars anyways.
Yeah.
They were the hobby stocks, they called them, or whatever. So I thought, oh, okay. So then, I think I might have put a mark on him. I think he got alongside me, and I think I gave him one. Anyways, I get away from him, and I sort of pulled away, so I sort of that's how I first got my first lesson. And we ran that car that year. Gary and Les Bach I think they were sharing a car, and they were sort of they were the hot dogs. They were winning everything in that division, and they had a big, I think a Ford or a Mercury, something like I had. And so we were running that car, and big wreck at Golden Sands on the front straightaway one night. I get rear-ended, and that car broke literally in half out on the racetrack. So that's what happened to that. Actually, that stub, I think, is that Ford stub. Everybody was after them.
Okay.
Off them old Galaxies and that. I think that was on one of Boomer's Novas then. Might have been that one that Dick won some races with. I think that
that's kind of cool. Yeah.
Yeah. So that car had a little bit of history after that.
Yeah.
Yeah. So good times.
Any other run-ins in the hobby stock times?
Well, I mean, that was good racing. I mean, it really was.
I think there were times I've heard of the hobby stocks at Golden Sands. They'd get rid of all the rules and people would come with all sorts of stuff, right?
Yeah, they did. Well, your dad and Brian. So it was about another year when that division really advanced.
Okay.
It was it took about another year, and your dad came with a good car, and Brian and Doug Johnson had good cars. Dean Fisher. It was really tough racing, and then, like you said, we'd have these open events, and Steve Carlson would come over from La Crosse.
Oh, no kidding.
Yeah, and the guys from Jefferson and that come up. Now, we were pretty competitive when they were at Plover, but when we went to their places, we weren't as fortunate. We were okay, but they were a little step ahead of us, but being at the track. But, yeah, that second year, we had built a Chevelle then, a good car, and anything with Albert, I always had to have a big motors. We didn't worry about handling too well. We worried about going down the streets. And I think opening day, I lost it pretty fast. I lost it, and your dad clipped me full bore head on.
Okay.
And we couldn't get them cars apart. The wreckers tried and everything. I don't remember how we ended up doing it. But there's pictures. Your dad probably has some.
Oh gosh, yeah, I haven't seen him, so I'll have to try and find that. Yeah,
yeah, and we had hit so hard in it, and that car was new, but the little bit we had ran it, it wasn't handling very good, and we were trying things. Well, it actually bent the stub on the right corner, and I don't know what it did, but it helped. It helped that car a ton. Okay. So I always thanked your dad, like he sort of straightened that car out for us a little bit. So, yeah, good racing though. Pretty competitive.
Okay.
Yeah. Always different winners, and good division.
So did you keep pulling it with the logger chain for a while?
Logger chain, yeah, we did that, and actually, so Albert at that point was living across from the racetrack. Okay. He had a little junkyard there, and he junked cars and stuff like that. Well, Albert took care of the ambulances for the track. So he would get them over there. He'd get the track opened up on the day of the races.
Okay.
And I'm trying to think. Sam promoted it then, and then that Paul Kerzowski from Green Bay had it, and then Jerry O'Day and Dean Spawn.
Okay, yep.
But Albert always had them ambulances and would get them over to the track. Well, we didn't have a trailer, so a couple of times we pulled my car behind the first ambulance we'd run, because me and Bill would run them over there, and we'd pull the car over there, park it in a spot, so we had a spot, and tools was in the trunk and things like that. And so, yeah, so the first time, and then we eventually built a trailer. Bill and I did. Albert got a frame, and he got these huge big planks. And Bill and I built this trailer. And, I mean, it was the heaviest trailer ever built.
Okay.
I mean, this thing was a tank, but that was actually the first trailer when I started doing that. But, yeah, it was like pulling behind them ambulance.
Yeah, it had been a sight to see.
Yeah.
Everyone stay out of your way, though.
Yeah.
Now, how did you and Albert kind of end up meeting up? Because he was a little older than you, right?
Yeah, Albert would be probably close to 80 now. So O'Brien's service garage was right across from our house on Post Road.
Okay.
So Albert was a mechanic there.
Gotcha.
And, of course, my parents went to races, and Vic was racing there a little bit. Rex was running in that hobby stock division, so we all knew him pretty good. And Albert was into softball. He was coaching a women's softball team.
Okay.
And always went to all the guys' softball stuff. So my parents was sort of big into that. And so just family friends is how that started. And then, like I said, I tagged along to a couple races with him. Even that's before he had the tire business.
Okay.
You know,
yeah.
they might decide on a Sunday night to go to a dirt race over at Seymour. I'd go along with them and stuff like that. So that's how that all started. And then, like I said, I was his first employee, you know, in the tire business. And then one thing with the tire business, when I went to work for him, like I said, he also hauled this.
I'm going to move your mic down. Just there you go. Perfect.
He also had the scales. So he was sort of Clem's right-hand man because, you know, the racers sort of wanted somebody out of the, you know, not a racer, but.
Yeah.
So Albert would help Clem out. And so Albert would get the scales of the track and then hire the scale guys.
Okay.
So Albert had me right away. I started helping Clem. So I started weighing cars and then a little bit of teching. You know, he'd tell me what to measure, you know, a crankshaft height or something like that. And a little bit, and I was fairly young, but so I would get done doing the tires, get cleaned up, and then the rest of the night we'd run the scales.
Okay.
So I got paid from the club and paid from Albert. It was sort of, like I said, it was my summer job, and it was great. You know, all these races we went to, you know, Sunday night, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday, you know, it was just a great time. Great time to be involved in racing.
Yeah, I mean, at that time, I mean, all the greats were around here, and I mean, you were going, five nights a week.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and then there would always be, sometimes there'd be Sunday specials, you know, afternoons. I remember lacrosse would have a couple now and then, and you know, a lot of racing. I forget that first year I kept track. I think it was close to 100 events.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that we went to, you know, so yeah, it was a good deal.
And at that age, were you getting home early?
Yeah, you know, not too bad. You know, when Albert had the tire business, he didn't stop a lot afterwards.
Okay.
But once in a while we would, but yeah, it was pretty much go to the track, do this stuff. And of course, when I was still in high school.
Yeah.
So when it was school season was still going on, I needed to be home, you know, during them weeknights and that. And yeah, good. It was a great time. It really was.
And how long did you do that with Albert for?
Oh man, I mean all the way through high school. I did start working at Moto at the gas station in Plover.
Okay.
I ended up working for that family for 43 years.
Yeah.
So I did start maybe when I was a sophomore, and I did both then. But they always worked around my racing deal.
Okay.
So I was able to do that. So I stayed full-time like that with Albert. Had to have been through high school, but I did, when we started racing more, like I said, with your dad and them, we started having some specials that we could go to, and Tomahawk and Wassa and things like that. So then them nights I didn't go with Albert. They were usually Saturday nights and like that. So I would miss out on the Dells usually, but he always had enough help. But yeah, it was a lot of fun.
Yeah, and then at what point because you had a super late model, right?
Yeah.
So at what point did racing progress for you?
Well, I'm trying to think here now. So we had built another Chevelle, sold that first one, built another one, and then also built a Camaro.
Okay.
And Bob Steffen, Bob's Auto Parts, Kevin Steffen. It was Kevin's dad, and he would always give us a car, you know, and then we'd build off there. So that last hobby stock, and then we were real competitive. Then we could go other places, and that was at Camaro. So Albert one day said, I think we should get a super late. And I thought, boy, we called them lates then, you know. I said, well, I don't know, you know. And he said, well, I have your car sold. I have that Camaro sold. And Tim Sauter was driving the Chevelle.
Okay.
That's Tim's first car. He was a teammate of mine driving.
Really?
That Chevelle.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's neat.
That was his first car. So he said, but I have the Camaro sold, and I'm going to take that money, and I'm going to buy this late model. I said, okay. So the late model he buys is TGM. Your dad worked for them, Twin Grove
Manufacturing, yeah.
Yeah, out of Verona, down
Yep.
by Madison. and they had an old Bemco car, and they had Roy Shackelford driving for them, and they were buying new Bach cars.
Okay.
So they had this Bemco car, and Albert made a deal, and them guys gave him a hell of a deal. And we had enough spare parts. We came back with trailers we could build about 3 Bemco cars, but it was older stuff. So
Sure.
that was the first late model.
Okay.
And we bought it late in that year, and I think I might have ran one race late in that year, and I don't know if that was 79 maybe.
Okay.
Something like that.
So really just a handful of years in the hobby stock, and then
Yeah. And then Ronnie Beyer built the motor.
Okay.
Amy's grandfather.
Yeah.
Built the motor for it. And we were low ballers. I mean, we had no money. Albert didn't have the money, so we never put tires on it. And but Albert always had
the tire guy's car didn't have tires.
No,
Yeah.
because it cost him money. But Albert always, if somebody came into town for one night and they weren't going to run with us for a while, Albert would make a deal and buy them tires. So I always had pretty good takeoffs, and of course
Sure.
Trickle, and I think we got stuff from your grandfather Tom, and everybody sort of looked out for them little guys like that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's how it worked.
And especially at that point, you could get by on some takeoffs for a while.
You could. There was no shoeing up then. Your grandfather and Dick and Tom and them guys, they might put on a tire now and then during that week, but really Wausau is when they would put the brand new tires on.
Okay.
And they could get that whole week. And La Crosse was very rough. Was a very rough, abrasive racetrack, and you couldn't. A new tire couldn't stand up there very well. You could do it, but it didn't stand up. So by the time we got back to La Crosse, they had a week on them tires, and that's how they pretty much did it.
Okay.
The shoeing up came on later on, and then it got out of control. That's when the super lates took off. But yeah, we ran that car. Pretty good little car it was. Started off in the consies and semis, and I think I made a couple features with that.
Okay.
Some of them nights you'd get where there maybe wasn't a ton of cars, and you could squeak your way in. But it came to a bad end at the Dells. That car did. Yeah, we went to a Artco show at the very end of the year. I think it was probably the last race of the year, and Dick had Bobby T and Boomer. Boomer was working for Dick then, I think. And he had me bring that car there, and they bump steered it, and we did a bunch, and we put a small clutch in it. We did some nice things to it. I think I got the carburetor from Dick, but they were big Hollies. They were 1,000 Hollies they were. So we go to the Artco show at the Dells, and Albert said, well, if it's looking like you're going to have a decent car, we'll maybe put 2 Wrights on, but we'll see how you go after practice. Well, the first practice session I get going out there, well, that small clutch made a huge difference. You could drive in,
Okay, yeah.
The other way, you had that big old flywheel, took a while to slow the car down, slow the motor down. So I get out there, throttle sticks, but I got it stopped. I got it rolled back. So I come in the pits, and we're going over, we had made a air box, and we're going through everything to make sure what this happened. And couldn't really find anything. We cleaned everything up. And so you go back out, and you're pretty tentative.
Right,
so I go back out. Everything seems good. So I start standing on her and making some laps. And finally I thought, well, it's time to get going. So made about 3-4 of them good laps. And into turn 1, she hung up. And, the Dells, you're somewhat turning in before you. And turn 1 wall, full bore. And that car, that old Bemco, and they were built so rigid.
Okay.
The right side roll bars were almost touching me. That's how bad this.
Okay.
It broke the crank, broke a head off the motor, cracked the motor. Rear end was 3 pieces. So this car was.
So you hit a ton.
I hit a ton. The fire bottle hit my helmet, cracked the helmet. I actually had, they were what you'd call as a burn on my, from the shoulder harness.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And my knees or my legs slammed together, like knee knock.
Yep. So,
I mean, outside of that, I was probably a little dizzed up in the head a little bit. Probably now we would say maybe a small concussion.
Sure.
But back then, but that car that thing was smashed. So, and it, like I said, it basically ruined everything we had, So that was sort of a drawback, but.
And how long were you running that up until that point?
I ran it that whole year.
Okay. So
it was really the first full year, and this was the last. I think it was the last race of the year. I think it was in September. I think probably the only thing left was maybe the Oktoberfest or something like that.
Gotcha.
And I had pretty much ran, when I ran late model, Plover was closed. I ran late model race at Plover, and then it closed. And I think that's happened that year before.
Gotcha.
So we basically ran the Dells and Wassa, and then I started going to La Crosse that year, about halfway through. And we'd venture to Madison, we a couple races. That was about it.
Sure. Okay.
So we actually ran that thing quite a bit, learned a lot, when we first got that car, it had huge big springs, everything was sprung so heavy back then.
Right.
And the thing had a push and couldn't figure out how to get this by it, Well, finally Dick said, come and get a spring raider and check them springs and let him know what he had. Well, here they were like 1,200-pound springs in the front. I would have never guessed that. So we lightened that up quite a bit. But still, it probably had 700 pounds in there, 800 pounds in spring.
Right.
Car was a tank, they were built real rigid,
Mm-hmm.
They were actually sort of heavy cars. That was them early 70 Bemcos is what it was. So, yeah. Yeah.
Then was that the end of running for Albert at that point?
No. Everything's pretty much smashed. I think we salvaged some of the stuff out of the motor. And Ronnie had a block. I think Ronnie had another motor halfway sitting there that we bought from him. And Johnny McNamara, I don't know if you ever heard that.
Yeah, I know. Yeah, for
People
sure.
that watch the show. So Johnny Mac's an old racer. Johnny Mac he started building these Howe kit cars.
Okay.
And they were off of basically a third design Howe. And he was putting the kit cages on them. And he had built 3 or 4 of them. Well, Albert bought one of them from John.
Okay.
It had been raced, but not very much. And that was a good little car. Of course, it was older. We weren't getting the new stuff, but it was pretty damn good little car. And Jim Weber, there's a name. So his car owner was Cliff Peterson, and Cliff owned C&J Motorhomes out of the cities, out of Minneapolis. And at that time, he was just starting to rent motorhomes.
Okay.
And, he was trying to get in that racing business. So him and Albert knew each other because, like I said, he owned Weber's car. So Cliff told Albert, if you guys run lacrosse, I'll put my name on the car and I'll help you out with parts and takeoffs from Jim. And, I'll help you throughout the year. And it ended up being a pretty good deal. So,
yeah.
So I was somewhat a Weber's teammate for that 1 year.
Okay.
And we did that. So that was our sponsor on the car. And then pretty much did the same thing. We ran lacrosse, Wassa, and the Dells, and I'd go to Madison maybe once a month. Went over to Kaukauna for the red, white, and blue, and like that. And I think I ran that car 2 years.
Okay.
Yeah. And then we took that car, Ron Neal, that owned Prototype engines, and Dick were going to come out with a car, and they were going to market it. It was called a Proto Trickle.
Yep,
So,
I've heard that.
Yeah, so they had a deal. You'd get this Proto Trickle, and you'd get a prototype motor and this chassis, and then Jim Sauter was making Mesita Flyer trailers.
Yep.
You could get a Mesita Flyer trailer, all in a package deal, actually a pretty good discount. Well, basically that haul car we had was almost basically the same thing except that stub.
Okay.
So Albert makes a deal with Dick, and they have a stub built that they're going to all these trade shows, PRI, and I forget what they called it then. They didn't call it then, but the big trade show was at Speed Weeks at Daytona.
Okay.
During Speed Weeks, they had a big trade show there. So they took that stub there, and Dick said, when we're done with that trade show, that stub is yours, and I'll put it on the car. So that was a deal. So I had bought I'm senior in high school, or maybe just done, I guess I was out of high school then, but when I was a senior in high school, I bought a little garage in Plover by Roosevelt School.
Okay. And
I was still in high school, made the payments on it. I was working at Moto and Albert, and I think the payment was $50 a month. And the garage at Albert's wasn't any good because he'd pile too much junk. It would take me an hour to get everything cleaned off. So I bought this garage, and it had an oil furnace in it. Well, Dick decides him and Boomer are going to come and put this stub on, and actually Joe Snodieski, who was Ronnie Byers' head guy, was going to come and help. It's about 20 below zero, and I couldn't get that heat up in that garage. You know, I had ran it for a couple days knowing it was going to get cold. That furnace wasn't working. Well, Albert said, hell with, they're putting it on. Dick can do it. So they came, and Dick was so mad because it was cold in that garage.
Yeah.
And they leveled everything off and put that proto trickle on there. And Doug Johnson in Rapids from the Rambler Garage, he was making the spindles. I don't know if he was making them for Dick too. I think he might have been.
Okay.
So Doug made us the spindles for it, and so we put that proto trickle on that car. And Rich Bickle Jr. was just starting to race full time. So in the wintertime, he was taking jobs on putting bodies on and interior tin. And so I think he did the interior tin on it. I think he might have put the body on it too. And pretty nice piece. And that was sort of the start of the wedge cars. We had the wedge noses in the back end.
Noses, all right.
Yeah, so that was that car, and it was a pretty good little car. I could make the dash every now and then at the Dells, and we had 406 9-1 Bruce from B&B built, and that 406 is what everybody wanted at that time, and had a couple good motors and pretty good little setup, but still we were running used tires, and we weren't really putting a lot of tires on it, and that hurt. It still hurt, but we did it to what we could afford.
Right.
Albert had no money, and I didn't have any, and I wasn't going to go to the poor farm running one of these, and we were racing a lot,
Right, yeah.
So you couldn't, and we weren't, the shoeing up days hadn't started yet, so that was one good thing. You weren't in that quagmire. It was happening a little bit, but nothing too bad. So, yeah, so that turned into that car,
but a much better car than all the other previous ones you had.
Yeah, and that thing worked good. And you had people you could bounce things off of, and basically it was that Ford stub again is what it was, a refined thing of, but it was real simple, very simple, just easy to figure out.
How long did they do the proto trickle thing for?
It didn't last long.
Okay.
I don't even know how many they built. I only think,
because I remember hearing about it, and like honestly, until you said the word proto trickle, I'm like, wow, I probably haven't heard that in 10 years.
I don't think, if I want to say, I don't even know if 5 cars got built.
Okay.
I'm not sure. And it was really priced well, but, I'm trying to think what year. I think the economy was just getting turned around again. Reagan became president. So I think things were starting to go pretty good, but I don't know. It just didn't take off.
Yeah.
But there was some of them around. There was no doubt that, and of course that basically Dick's cars were that, before he started driving the Dillon stuff and the Hanley stuff. And
Sure,
like
okay.
that. So, but a very good car, very simple. Just keep your notes good and good little race car.
Did you ever pick up an A main win in a super late model?
No, I never did. I got close with that car a few times. Wassa was usually my best bet.
Okay.
And Kirby was on here.
Yep.
I watched Kirby, and he was telling about the time he had half the lap lead.
Yeah.
And that happened to me one night. And
okay.
But there was actually a true caution. And the big guys got up there, and I ended up getting, I think, third or fourth.
Okay.
And then I had a couple seconds and a couple thirds up there, a couple good runs at the Dells. But, we wanted to make the features, and we were with that car quite a bit. Very seldom do we run a semi. And, if we would get in the top 10 of the feature, that was a win for us.
Okay.
It was all them guys were still racing.
Yeah, you're running. It's a lot of big names.
Yeah, Dick was still racing, and Marv was still there. I think that might have been Marv's last year.
Okay.
83, 84, somewhere in there. But Bach was still there. Your dad was still there. Brian was running. Bickle Jr.
Yeah.
Actually, Bickle Sr. would pick up wins, and it was pretty competitive. Holhausen, Steve was going. Greg was fast. Greg Holhausen.
Yeah.
So Kevin Sywinski was going in, and good racing. It really was.
Yeah. So at a young age, I mean, you're running it at a great time. At a great time in racing.
Yeah. You could learn a lot. You really learned a lot, and everybody helped. I mean, it was a good camaraderie of everybody.
Was Trickle, or was there anybody else that you really looked to for any advice when it came to driving or setup or anything like that, or admired?
Dick helped a lot on the setups, but there was a couple guys that gave me a lot of driving advice, and I'd say Mike Miller was probably one of the most, and he was just forthcoming. He'd watch a race and say, hey, you're not setting up the guys to pass, and things like that. And Marv was another one. Okay. And there was a couple times where I know Marv one night gave me a pretty good jack, and I don't know, I was doing something screwy in front of all them guys, and Marv said, that'll be enough of driving like that. They didn't like that. So, they all helped out, and Tom was always good. You get parts off Tom. I mean, he'd help you out, anything he could help you, and he gave you good advice. If you had a problem, you'd go to him. If couldn't get a push out of a car, he'd give you a bunch of ideas to try, and good times.
Now, kind of going back a little bit, when you were growing up going to the races, did you have a guy that you always cheered for?
Well, Marlon Wallback.
Okay.
Yeah. So, that was my guy, and it was real funny. The town, it was the town of Plover, and then it became the village. Just the old downtown became the village of Plover. Well, the first year they had bike license, so you had to get in line to get your bike license. So the first person got number 1. So I'm counting. He was number 30.
Number 30, yeah.
The person down or something. and I got number 30. And I think Rock did the same thing. Rock had 99. And a friend of ours, Leroy Berleski, got your grandpa's 88.
Okay.
That's what he did. I think Jeff Sluter
cool.
might have got 91. I can't remember how that all worked. But
our
cool. Guys, we got in line and got them for our bike license number. So, but I was a big Wallback fan. And then it just ended up being Albert and Vic. They were a huge Wallback. In fact, they had helped him a little bit.
Okay.
And
because number 30 was your number as well.
Number 30,
right?
yeah.
Okay, yeah.
And so them first cars, even that first late model, all looked like his cars. They were black and gold.
Okay.
And the white numbers, and they looked just like them old Marlon Wallback cars.
And did you pick 30 then for your number because of Marlon Wallback?
Yeah, and I had no choice. Albert just said, well, you're going to be number 30.
Okay.
And that's, Albert said, this is it. And I was fine with that. I mean, I thought that was pretty good. They always called him Shoes.
Yep.
Wallback. And I forget who we had letter. I think Mike Morgan lettered the first car, and he put boots on there. instead of shoes, like, where they would have shoes on the car, we put boots. So, yeah. So some people call me that, and that was never a nickname, but that's what was on the car.
Oh, that Boots was on your car?
Boots was on my car,
Okay.
because they called Marlin
shoes, so then you were Boots, okay.
Yeah. So, but yeah, that's Wallback was the guy.
Okay. Now were you truly running for Albert? Like Albert was covering everything?
Yeah,
or?
them first couple years. I think when we got to that proto trickle, then we were partners.
Okay.
But them first couple years, Albert.
You were young.
Yeah.
Really very, very young.
Yeah,
so.
I bought the hauler and the trailer and stuff like that.
Okay.
Even right away.
Did you have a Nacita Flyer?
I had a Nacita Flyer. The first shot we had an old pickup truck. We converted that.
Okay.
And then I had a bread truck, but I ended up getting one of them wedge. I actually bought Bickle Jr.'s wedge truck.
Okay.
He had a big wedge truck, the bed on it.
Yep.
So it had a crew cabin. So I had that probably the longest.
Okay.
But we had a Nacita Flyer. Yep. Yeah, and Albert had, because like I said, Albert had that little junkyard. When they built the Nacita Flyer for us, Albert had the tire rack built higher, so a street car, because otherwise the tire racks were real low just for a race car. So in the pitch you could always tell which Nacita Flyer was mine, because the tire rack was way higher than anybody else's.
Okay.
So that was one, and we got one of the first ones. Jim started building them, and I don't know how many of them he built. Them were going all to ASA, and he sold. Marcus had one in NASCAR.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah, Dave was pulling on some of the closer races out of North Carolina. He'd pulled just behind, I think he had a van. He had a van, and he had that Nacita Flyer.
Okay.
Yeah, so, things just pulled really good trailer. Yeah.
Oh, that's cool. So then how long did the super late model with Albert go on for? Well,
then after that second year of that proto trickle, and that's sort of when the shoeing, the tiring up started.
Okay.
A little bit that year, and that would have been 85, I'm thinking. So, in that proto trickle was coil car, it was getting old. The straight rail cars were coming out now, the Fit Design Howes, and
okay, sure.
Anderson was building a real fast car. The Bach cars were coming out, dominating. Yep. And we had this sort of old antique. So Albert and I bought Danny Shabrowski's from Minnesota. Dick Stang was driving for him, and he had it was only a year or two old, Howe Fit Design. That was a straight rail car. Coilovers. We bought that car, and I'll never forget. It was quite a bit of money. Back then it was, and I took a loan on it. I'm thinking, how foolish is this? But we had it paid for by July 1st. I'll never forget that.
Okay.
We took some of our sponsor money and then what the car was doing, and we got that loan paid off. And I was so, but I struggled in that car big time. So, weight got to be a big thing. Mm-hmm. That year, then they really started shoeing up. So we were going about every night. The tires were going up.
Now, did things with the tires change, or were guys just starting to figure out, hey, if we just keep stickers on this thing, we can run him?
Yeah, some more guys started racing, younger guys, and I think a little bit more money came in.
Okay.
And I think that their mindset thought, well, if I keep tires on it, I can run with Tom and Dick, and Dick and Tom aren't going to sit by the wayside. They're going to,
Yep.
So
snowballs.
Everything snowballed. So, anyways, we get this car and spent pretty good money on it, and I had them two 406s, refreshing them with the B&B, but the 406s at that time, they were weighing them down because they were having a hard time getting the blocks. They weren't the most reliable in longevity.
Sure.
So I think they had us that year, they put a 125-pound penalty on us. So here you get this lightweight car that had a 355 in it when Stang was driving it. Here we have to put this 406 in it, but that's all we had, you know. And that wasn't the right combination for that car at all because, you know, weight was becoming a huge thing and getting it low.
Right.
The drivers were sitting right on the floorboard almost. Couldn't hardly see out of them. You know, them old cars, I sat up, you know, it was easy to drive them, easy to see. But now here you're, and the cars all had started tipping. You know, they were sprung light for them days. And I just had frustrations driving that car. And I was making the features. That wasn't a problem, but I wasn't competitive at all.
Okay.
You know, I was just getting by. And I have a little bit of claustrophobia. I always have had this.
Okay.
So that car, when I sat low, you know, the door's right here. And I just got more of a feeling. Of course, the cage is narrower now. The top bars are down just over your head.
Yep.
So I got that feeling that I was enclosed a little bit. So I was a little uncomfortable. I got through it, you know. I tried to drive with a full face helmet. I couldn't do it. I had to go back to an open face helmet.
Because of the claustrophobia.
Yeah.
Okay.
So that was one thing that I just never felt comfortable in that car. And another thing that was going on, Joe Milanuski was my main guy for almost all the years I raced.
Okay.
And I had all them hockey kids, John Whitman and Dwayne Krieger and Nathan Durst, John Sluter. So, but now here they're seniors now, and racing's not their thing anymore. So I started going to a couple of these races by myself. You know, Joe had just gotten married, and his new wife said she didn't want nothing to do with the racing. So he would come to the shop and do a few things, but actual going to the track. Well, Alan Check and his brothers that was their first year of late models.
Okay.
And they had bought a pretty old car, but he was running pretty good with it. And they had put coilovers in this older car. And so when I was going by myself, I tried to park by them guys, and they'd be able to give me a hand. And like I said, it was a frustrating year. It really was. And I had even told Albert, we had that proto-trickle. And it was fairly close. You know, there was some things we had robbed off. I said, I'm putting that back together. I'm going to come back out in that car because this thing just isn't working out. And he said, no, keep driving. It'll get better. And like I said, the motor combination with that weight just killed us. And so there was a bad accident at the Dells one night on the front straightaway, and I was right in the middle of it. 2 wreckers into the pits, and that was one of the nights I was by myself. The Czech boys were next to me, so we got that car up on the hauler, and I'm looking around at, boy, there's a lot of stuff. What it's going to need.
Right.
And there again, we didn't have a lot of money. And so Alan's over there looking at it with me and his brothers, and Alan says, well, bring her by the shop, and we'll give you a hand with it. It's going to take a week or so to get everything. The fuel cell was mangled in it and all this. So I said, you know what, Alan, and it wasn't at the end of the year, but it was getting towards the end.
Mm-hmm.
I said, I'm going to go talk to Albert, but I said, we get this back together. I said, do you want to get in this? Because this was a way better car than what he had.
Okay.
Yeah. And he said, yeah. And I said, Albert's going to probably want to keep running R406s, so you're going to have to live with that, And he said, well, let's give it a shot. So I went over to Albert and said, hey, I'm just not, I'm going to the races by myself, and we're struggling here, and I can't figure this car out. So I said, let's run Alan. I said, the specials are coming up. So I said, we'll hit a couple of them Artco shows, and we'll try to put tires on. And Alan had some sponsors too. Alan had a little bit more money.
Okay.
There again, like I said, some of them young guys that came in and they had a little bit more money. So,
and is that what made you just initially gave you the thought to put Alan in there? Because they were giving you a hand and you were just kind of frustrated with the whole
Yeah.
program? Okay.
Yeah, like I said, I couldn't get that car figured out, and
Yeah, you got a frustrating car, you're down on help,
right.
and it's,
I didn't like how you sat. Like I said, the cars back then, Brian and them can tell you, they really had a lean to them. They really, because they were sprung so light.
yeah.
And I hated that. I wanted mine to be sturdy and up in the air. I didn't want a lot of movement, and so it's just preference. So we took the car out to Shantytown, and we went to work on it right away. We put the other 406 in there, which was a little bit better motor, and got that thing going. We went to Wausau. They were still running weekly, but there was maybe only 1 or 2 weeks left.
Okay.
Had a pretty good run in the feature with it. And then we went, I forget, maybe over to Kaukauna, and we got murdered over there, but we more or less got murdered because of that motor and the weight.
Okay. Yeah.
So Alan said, let's put he had a Wagner, I think, or I forget, he might have had a B&B even, but a 355 where they weren't penalized.
Yeah.
So we put his motor in there, went to the Arco show at the Dells, made the show, and a couple of them special at the end of the year we ended up making. And Alan and I got along good and everything, but it was different. You know what I mean? I sort of wanted to be more or less calling the shots, and Alan had some kick in the car now with the motor and all this,
Yep.
and so we got to the end of the year, maybe before the fest, and we got together, and Alan bought me out.
Okay.
So him and Albert stayed partners in that deal. So that's how I got out of super late at that point.
At that point, okay.
Yeah. So when that happened, I went out and I bought a brand new Chevrolet dually pickup. I went and bought a brand new enclosed trailer. I went and I got a advertising company to make sponsor proposals, professionally done.
Yep.
And I geared my shop up. I took all that money I had gotten from Alan and then other things that I had saved up, and I had talked to Dick, and I had in my mind I was going to try to go ASA, but I was looking for a good sponsor.
Right.
And I had the local Miller guy, but I had ties to the Miller. We got a little bit out of the Miller in Milwaukee, not a lot. And I had Moto, the family that I work for.
Yeah.
And they were a very good sponsor. So I had some. So I sent these proposal kits out, and lo and behold, Moto come and I had a pretty good price tag. I asked Dick. I got a lot of stuff from Dick what it took, to run them shows, and I had a pretty good idea. So I threw a pretty good dollar amount out there, but I had a lot of good things built in for a sponsor. And so Moto said, we think we could maybe do this, but we're not going to really know till the very end of the year or the start of next year. So I thought this is good. So I had talked to Mike Randerson about getting a car, and I talked to Bruce at B&B. I hadn't bought nothing, but I had things lined up, and I tooled up in the shop things what I needed in there, and the economy wasn't doing very good. Now we're mid to late 80s, probably 87. This is 86, 87. Things weren't going the best economy wise. So Moto at the last minute says we're not going to do it this year. We're going to revisit it in a year. So I thought this isn't the worst. So I put epoxy floor in the garage, and I bought.
This is still the same shop.
Yeah, a little garage in Plover. Yeah,
okay.
And I just bought a lot of different things that you would need.
Takes a lot to go racing.
Grease and oil and anything that I thought.
It all adds up.
Yes, it all adds up. I thought I'll have all this stuff, and it won't hurt the budget for that next year once we get going. And the next year it didn't work out. The economy hadn't came back, so I sold that truck and trailer, and I had you're approaching 2 years being out of it.
Mm-hmm.
And you know what I mean? That's an eternity, I think, in racing a little bit. You know what I mean? And,
It feels like a while, yeah.
yeah. So, I didn't know what I was going to do. I'd gotten out of it. And Rick Summers, Rich's boy, was building a sportsman car at his dad's shop out on 66. And I had been friends with Rick and them guys, Rick and Randy. And so Rick calls, and him and his dad aren't getting along. And he said, I need a shop. So I said, yeah, you come and you can use my shop, and I'll give you a hand. Now I'm helping Clem Droste quite a bit.
Okay, so still involved in racing.
Yeah, so I'm teching the cars, and I'm Clem's right-hand man. I don't know, I think I was his vice president then, but I'm basically following him around and doing things with him. So I tell Rick, yep, and I'm not kidding you, it wasn't a half hour later, Joe Milanuski calls. Joe helped me. Joe says, I'm buying a sportsman car. I need your shop. And I said, Joe, I just told Rick, and there was room for 2 cars because I had 2 cars in there. I says, we can probably make this work, but Rick's got to clear this because I've already committed to Rick. And
yeah.
So I called Rick, and Rick said, yeah, this will be great. He knew Joe, and
Sure.
Everybody was pretty good friends. So them 2 guys came in there. We went sportsman racing, and I helped them a little bit more. Now, that was about Clem's last year with the CWRA, and he very seldom came around. He pretty much told me, he said, if you have problems, you give me a call. He was still the president.
Okay.
He still stayed in that gig, but so I was pretty much going every night, not every night, and teching the cars, and I was going with Joe, helping them out and helping Rick out. And,
Okay.
in the garage here, and then had a blast. That sportsman race, and we had just a great time.
Okay.
And them 2 got along real good, being in the garage, and they were both learning. They were both rookies.
Sure.
You know, both first time racing, and really a good time. It was really a good time in racing. Yeah, really enjoyed that. That was a good division. You know, Columbus they raced at.
Okay.
Lot of good cars.
Actually, I just read a racing paper yesterday when I was out at my grandma's. Someone had dropped it off, and it was my grandpa racing at Columbus, and I think it was in 75, and you know, Columbus was a track that I didn't really grow up knowing a lot about, and I knew a racer myself, and I was like, man, I never knew those guys really went over there, so that was kind of...
They'd go over there for specials.
Okay, so yeah, that was cool to see.
And Bob Schmelzer was the promoter.
Okay,
so
Bob
if you
Schmelzer.
remember Bob, or...
No, I don't think so.
He might have been, you know, he ran the pit gates for Artco and Madison. Okay. He ran, almost was at all the tracks over, you know.
Gotcha.
And he was a promoter at Columbus at that time, that mid-70s.
Okay.
Yeah.
Gotcha.
Yeah. Yep. So.
And then when did you get eventually you got your shot at being the president of CWRA then?
Yeah, so that next year, Clem, right before the winter meetings, Clem says, I'm not running. He said, I'm going to run this first meeting, and then you can take over.
Was he doing stuff with NASCAR at that point?
A little bit. In fact, it was mostly Artco, but he was doing a little bit with that NASCAR Grand American. And I was actually going with him a little bit on that stuff.
Interesting. All right.
After the 9-1 deal, I actually even, when they came up with that 9-1, now I was 15, 16 years old, but I went with Clem he'd go give talks about this 9-1 over to Michigan. I went with him one time to Iowa.
Okay.
And so he'd get these one-off races, these promoters. I-70 one time called him, hey, can you come run this show? So I would go with him on that. Just we'd run that show together.
Yeah.
So, but anyways, he said, he was too thin. You know what I mean? He was spread too thin.
Yeah.
And in the CWRA, we were still racing all them nights. And, you know, if he was living, he would tell you, and I'd be the one to agree with it. there's term limits in politics for a reason. You know, after so many years, you lose your effectiveness, and you know, and you're staying too long. You know, you're at that job too long, and Clem probably was in that spot, and I think he knew it. So he made the announcement. I got elected, and I had a real good board and officers. Gary Bach, Brian. We had some young guys in there, and our rule book was like from Ben-Hur days. I mean, it was ancient.
Okay.
We would show how to put a cage on a car off of a 57 Chevy. That was still in our... Now, this is 1987, 88.
All right.
So I told Gary and Brian, I said, we've got to get this rule book up, you know, to where we're racing. And so we went through the rules, and the very first meeting I said, listen, things have slid. And we had, because we weren't checking crankshaft heights and motor setbacks, and Clem didn't, I don't know, he just sort of didn't want to be messed with that anymore, and things have slid, you know, and there again, like I say, it's probably time to make a change. So I said at that first meeting, I said, now, what do you want? Because there's things in this rule book that we've let slide, and we got to reel it back in or change it. Well, everybody said, we got to reel this stuff in. So we went through the meetings, and I'll never forget Golden Sands was opening day. And I bet you the first 5-6 cars, engine setback. There wasn't one that was even close. Crankshaft height. So, and these guys are all screaming and hollering at me like, you're not measuring it right. And over the winter, Dwayne Werner was on and Dwayne was real. We had built a swing set, you know, to check all the body heights, and
okay,
we had and he had a measurement tool to do the engine setback. So we were prepared for all this, and we were catching hell, you know. So we had a driver's meeting. It was opening day, and I said at the driver's meeting, I said, now, do you guys want to continue? You know, we're going to get this rule book squared away. And your grandfather said, damn right, we're getting this back squared away. So we stayed on track, and I was real good. We gave everybody enough time. You know, I said, you don't have to have it next week. We need a couple weeks. Let's get this. Because it had been going on for a few years.
Yeah.
So that's how it all started. And we got, like I said, I had just a good group. We got our point fund back on its feet in the first couple of years.
Yeah, that's huge.
Yeah, and we had it real good, and then, you know, there again, everybody just, it falls off. You know, it's gone so many years, and then so we rejuvenated that. We got a main sponsor again, and got things back rolling pretty good right off the get go. So them first few years was rolling good. You know,
what was one of the most interesting things in having to do all that at that time with that group of guys? I guess what, maybe not interesting, but what was the most fun part of that?
I think, especially like with the board and all them guys, and we had that point fund committee and Charlie Schwach and his wife, just to being able to delegate and to see that they did their work, and they went out and you know, they just did a great job, and everybody was pulling. You know, our car counts had gone up. We were sort of, everything had gotten stale. And then, you know, Dick was done running with us.
Okay.
Marv had retired. Jim maybe had just gotten hurt. You know, Bach was in that car era going to a race and broke his neck.
Okay.
And he was off for a year or two. Your dad was running most of the races yet. Brian was a little bit, but Brian was starting to spread his wings and race more out of the area. And so we, you know, our facilities had sort of gotten old. You know, I mean, everything, our promotions just stayed the same, you know. So I think that was one nice thing to see, that everybody pulled, and we just sort of had a revival a little bit there.
Yeah. I think, to kind of go off on a little bit of a tangent, I think that's kind of, you know, one of the things, you know, with racing is that's so tough, is you have series, and you have the drivers, and you have the facilities, and, the sponsors for the point fund, it's, you have all these different pieces of the puzzle that are in everyone, or, all these different people's hands, and it's all got to be there to make it happen.
Yeah, you're right. To make that merge, that's a tough thing. That's very tough, and we struggled maybe a little bit with that to get the promoters to make sure that they're promoting the CWRA and we got it to work. We really had a good setup. John Quinn helped a lot. Our points would be figured out. They would get to him. There was a flyer at all the tracks that was ready to go. So Wednesday night, them had to be ready and being passed out to the fans coming in. And all that had to be coordinated, all the sticker program on the cars. And plus, like you said, the track had their stuff. So, you had to,
and then juggle all that with a full-time job, I presume.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. No, I was working full-time. I was coaching hockey, ran that CWRA, and I was on the village board for Plover.
Okay.
I think all at that time was going on. And so I had my hands full, but it was just a good time. And I was young, and then, we just had just a good time, and we had everybody pulling in the right direction there.
And through which years were you involved in CWRA?
Well, like I said, I started teching cars right away when that would have been 76 probably 76, with Clem.
Okay, yep.
And then when I became president, I think was 87 or 88.
Okay.
And then I did that all the way. I was elected for 98 season, but I resigned at the start of the 98 season in March. So during that, so it was 10, 11 years. And there again, when I say a guy, there should be term limits. There was 10 or 11. I'm thinking about year 7 is when I should have just said, hey, it's somebody else's turn to step up. Because there again, your ideas, you lose your effectiveness, I think, a little bit.
Sure.
Then, the longer you get, more people are have a chance to get mad at you or don't like your ideas. All this stuff just keeps piling, and it sort of came to a head in 98. And it was an unfortunate thing, but it had to probably happen. And then, the CWRA only lasted maybe a couple more years after that, the weekly stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it was probably inevitable that was going to happen. It was just, and I don't even know nowadays if it's viable to have a weekly super late program. It's tough.
Yeah, it is.
It's and it was getting tough then. It was way doable yet, but we just had some difficulties. We had some new guys come on, new racers, and they had their ideas. Of course, I had my old ideas, and Plover was doing real well. Baziner was running that track and had ran it now for, a number of years, and he was doing well there. And Wassa was struggling, and Marshall had just sort of started struggling. That's the last 3 tracks them were the 3 you had at the end there.
Okay.
And them 2 were struggling, and Plover's hitting it out of the gate. And I think, a lot of the drivers, they want Darrell to pay more. Well, it's hard to get Darrell to pay more when you can't get Wassa and Marshall up. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
You had to give them a break because they're struggling at the gate, and you can't just take everything from Darrell. So, you're trying to mesh this as a president. You're trying to make this work. And so I think that created a little bit of conflict. Darrell and I, over the winter, came to an agreement. We were actually down in Daytona during Speed Weeks, and we had a good talk, and he agreed to he'd increase his pay. And then there was another thing was going on with what you just said about merging these sponsors. So we had lost our main sponsor. CWRA did the series.
Okay.
But Jim Langrick and Phil actually had CarQuest, but they weren't they weren't doing probably the best job with it, and they needed help with that. So Jim and Phil wanted help with that. So they said, why don't you take the car quest for the CWRA? And the tracks at that point paid a sanctioning fee every night, and they wanted to get out of that sanctioning fee. There was enough money with the car quest, plus there was extra. It was a better deal to get it all, and it cleared them out of their sanctioning fee. So we sort of made that deal. We made that all mesh. So I had a board meeting. I went to Speed Weeks, had a board meeting, and the board had changed. It was a little younger, and there was some older guys were there, and so I brought up everything that I had done, and on Saturday, it was early March, and now Danny Summers and I just started Midway Machine about 2 days before.
Okay.
So now I have all this going on. So I'm hockey and racing, and my territory is Minnesota and Wisconsin.
Okay.
I'm putting on about 60,000 miles a week just in that, or a year.
Wow.
So, so we have a board meeting Saturday. A lot of the kids that I coached in hockey are playing the state championship, and it's on TV. So I'm watching this game. Phone rings, and it's one of our prominent board members, a prominent racer, and says, "Listen, after the meeting, a lot of us don't agree with your idea on Daryl's pay increase and the sponsor deal." And I said, listen, you brought up a good point, and it's a good time. I said, my hands are full. I got Midway just 2 or 3 days old, and I had kept my job and was doing that too. Mm-hmm. So I said, hey, I'm going to step aside, and Mark Mackesy was the vice president.
Okay.
So I called Mark up, and I explained everything to him, and I said I called Daryl up and the promoters, and I said, hey, you guys got to regroup and meet with the board and meet with Mark, and I think there was a lot of conflict, and there was just things that Plover, Phil pretty much quit running supers at that point, sometime that year or maybe that next year, and
okay.
Daryl, there was some conflicts, but there again, I think it was inevitable. I don't know if you could keep running a super late series every night of the week and to keep the same guys racing, because we didn't have a whole lot of followers.
Mm-hmm.
They ain't able to afford that. So that's just sort of how that all ended.
Okay.
So
now, let's say let's say early 90s. How many tracks were CWRA?
Early 90s, we had lacrosse was Wednesday nights. Wausau was Thursday. Let's see. I think Plover was running then. So we had Plover Friday, and we had the Dells Saturday. And then sometime 94, the Dells pulled out, but Marshfield started.
Okay.
So that Saturday night went that route. And then our Wednesday night at lacrosse, we went to 6 shows a year. Instead of weekly, it was 6 events throughout on Wednesday nights.
Okay.
Because their main night was Saturday night. They were doing that NASCAR Northern Series.
Okay, sure.
And that's where they geared up. They still kept us going, and we drew halfway decent. And so, but then we ran the National Short Track Championship at Rockford. We did that for a couple of years. We usually had at least one show at Madison, a standalone show. Usually it was on a Saturday late in the year.
Okay.
We had gone to Columbus. We had a show at Kaukauna. Was there for a couple of years, so we had a lot of fill-in stuff.
Okay.
Yeah, it was. That's about where we were at.
Now, around in those times, if a track decided they didn't want to be a part of CWRA any longer, what was usually the reasoning? Because they just wanted to have control over things at that point.
Yeah, they wanted more control, and then we were on that recap tire.
Okay.
And
yeah,
we had some promoter changes, So in 90, and I think that was 1990. At the end of 90, Larry Weirs calls me, and he's running the Dells. And his wife was wanting to retire, and he says, I'm not running weekly anymore. I'm going to run 2 Artco shows, and that's it. And maybe a couple Tuesday night races. Larry always ran a lot. Tuesdays always drew pretty well. Mm-hmm. And he said, I want the club. If you want it, you run the weekly racing. And he said, I'm trying to find a buyer. He said, you can either help me with that. And he says, it's going to get harder if we don't keep it open. So our board met with Larry, and we hashed a few things out. And I told Larry, I said, well, I suppose, we're probably going to have to talk to a lawyer, Larry says, you don't on my behalf. He said, you and I can shake hands. And we had everything planned out how it was going to work. So we shook hands. We went to the board, and we hired Kenny Andrich, Doc.
Yeah.
He was our full-time employee. So he went to work right away and got down to Dells, started selling the billboards. And most of the track workers, all the ticket takers, they were workers of mine at Moto.
Okay.
Cool. Most of them, Danny Summers' sister and Amy Pearson, a bunch of her friends. And then the track workers were some of the workers from Moto and people I knew. So we put all this together. MG Gajewski, they owned King's Camper, mm-hmm. and they gave us the oil dry truck.
Okay, cool.
And we lined up a deal with wreckers, and so we had everything covered all that way. We had a CWRA cleanup day at the track. We did start the year, so we cleaned all the facilities up, painted a couple of the buildings, and we did that all as a club.
Yeah.
And so we started the year, and we had 3 rainouts right in a row. And we decided that we were going to, there again, things had gotten stale, so we needed to make a change. So we started advertising on all the Madison radio stations, and that was expensive. So now here we are advertising. So Larry Weirs calls me on that Saturday morning. We called the one real early, that third Saturday. And he calls, he says, you guys got to be in rough shape. I go, we are, because we had spent pretty much all our billboard money, and basically everything we had in our accounts, we were down. And so Larry said, well, do you guys need a shot of money? I'll give you a shot, and throughout the year you pay me back. I said, no, I'm not going down that path, because we're all ready and we don't need to.
Yeah.
So that next week, perfect weather. We had a big crowd, and then we averaged pretty good crowds. They still weren't where it needed to be, but we were heading the right direction.
Okay.
And then Luke Herring, who was a sponsor of Brian's, he had the hobby shop in Rapids. Him and he wanted to buy the track, so he bought the track, and he kept us around for a year or two. It must have been 2 years, and then he wanted to go his own way, and he never liked that tire. He never liked that, and he wanted to get the slinger guys there and stuff like that, and so that's the route he went. But Jim Langrick at that same time paved Marshfield, mm-hmm. So we had a Saturday night gig to go to.
Gotcha.
So that's how that all came together there.
Now, through a lot of those years of CWRA, obviously CWRA, was around through a lot of years then, and then, is around now. But back in, through those 70s and 80s, wherever in those times you'd consider it at its peak, what really made all of that, such a great, thing to be a part of and a great time frame, because even nowadays, you hear people, CWRA, at that time was, was great and loved it. And,
one thing that made it easy, we had the best of the best,
for drivers.
For drivers. And we ran so much in a year's time. Our guys were racing, and a lot of these guys were maybe running once a week, and the other. So when we went out of town, we had a big advantage on everybody just because, you know, them guys are racing. But the we had good racing towns. I mean, Rapids, Plover.
Yep.
Plover and Rapids, great. Wausau was a great racing town. I mean, I'm going by the how smart their fans were and dedicated, and you'd see them at the other tracks.
Yeah.
You know, we had that going on. So you had a following, a built-in following right there. And the promoters, they had a lot of promotions going on. You know, when Sam in his heyday, he'd have somebody flipping cars over, or, you know, a guy on roller skates with a jet, or, you know.
Right.
We just had other things that brought people in. We had, and there was only, basically, most of that whole time we ran 2 divisions. We had the super lates and we had the hobby stocks. And both divisions had good following, and they were basically the same rules throughout the whole thing. You know, the hobby stock division. So that worked for, you know, you didn't get a lot of them guys traveling, but when you got into Madison, if a guy wanted to come down, he could. And
right.
So that, so we had a lot of things just going, you know, we had good officiating and a lot of the same officiating from track to track. You know what I mean? It was just sort of now it'd be so hard to do that. You know, just think of that, to get that kind of commitment, you know.
Yeah, the commitment, and just everyone's pulling their weight and doing the right thing.
Right. And you always had Larry Weirs or Phil did it a lot. They would always try to get Bobby Allison up here, usually once a month, or, you know, Mark Martin, or, you know, they would have these guys in at these shows, you know. And I can remember Allison coming to lacrosse on Wednesday nights. Just there was no extra laps, you know.
Wasn't any special race. He was
it
just there on a
Bobby
Wednesday.
Allison night, and he was there and he raced. And
that's cool.
You know, it was things like that. You didn't have to go crazy, and, you know, so it really was a great time. It was, and there again, the rules, they had very sensible rules, and they kept an eye on one another, and they didn't put up with that tire thing, you know, that shoeing up. You know what I mean?
Okay.
If anybody did that, it was a discourage to them. You know, we don't do that. We can't afford, you know, we ran for decent money, but it wasn't nothing great. Even back in them days, it was. But if they kept their expenses in line, they could do it. You know, your grandfather would take most of the summers off every year, and you know what I mean? And he had a great paying job, and he could do that and race that car. But they weren't into a lot of wasted money, and they didn't put up with people crashing. You know, if a guy started being a ramrodder, they dealt with you pretty quick.
Right.
You know, and they just had that camaraderie that kept everything afloat.
Yeah. That's an interesting and a tough thing, you know, to have such a large group be on the same page of, hey, they just all happen to not put a bunch of tires on and just did it, you know, an economical way, and did what made sense. So that they could run so many nights a week too.
Right. Yeah. Because they could do it, then they'd, you know, it just, they had it figured out, you know, and they didn't waver a lot. You know what I mean? They stayed true, and they kept the rules in line, and they kept, you know, everybody sort of watched us. So Michigan and everybody, you know, Grundy, Elko, the Minnesota tracks watched us. Okay. So they were always on the same rule. You know, everybody sort of kept an eye on us. And now, you know, look at how it, you know, there's tracks in the state that aren't even the same now. You know what I mean? And it's, I don't know. I don't know if you'll ever get back to any point like that. It's pretty hard.
Yeah, it definitely is. I mean, sometimes people make the case, well, you know, our rules aren't really that different. You only got to add, you know, if it's like a different weight percentage or different overall weight. Well, as someone that spends night after night after night after night after night being in the shop working on the thing.
Right.
If you don't have to take the extra step of,
Yeah.
you know, throwing the lead on and, you know, changing this just to accommodate to attract, it's sure nice just to,
Yeah.
you know, there's enough that goes into nowadays just for changing the overall setup and to making sure it's right. And,
Yeah, no, that was one, you know, I can remember when I was racing. So say we were at La Crosse, okay, races would get done. We'd let the car cool down. And of course we had to change gears for Wassen. Usually it was one shock change or was a minute thing. We would do what we had to. We knew what we had to put in the car to go to Wassa. And if there was nothing where the car had to be unloaded, we got that work all done, got the car up on the hauler, and it stayed there till we got out of work. And, you know, and we did that night in and night. And that's why, anytime any roughhousing started, we tried to put an end to that because we didn't have time to be fit, especially when early on we had them steel bodies, you know, there were steel bodies on them cars, you know, some of us had, you know.
Right.
And you didn't want to be fixing them things.
Yeah.
You know? So it was simple times and, you know, and I think the CWRA now, I think it has their niche.
Yep.
They have now, they can run them older cars and they're on that cap tire, which hell, they can run that whole year and they can get to some tracks that want to have that super late model presence. And, so I think they've carved themselves out a niche to keep that thing out there, and it'll probably work.
Yeah, I think so. You know, obviously, you know, there's people that run it the full season. There's people that run a handful of shows. I mean, right. I've had years where, hey, that was just way more economical for me, so I went and ran 4 or 5 of those instead of, you know, some other big show because it worked out with the budget that year. And
yes, yeah.
It was, you know, it's better than just running 4 big specials or something that year, and you know, keeps you running.
Yeah. No, I get that. So like I said, they have their niche built in there, yeah. And hopefully they can have the guys that keep it going, and you know, because that's what it takes. You know, they all got to keep working together and get it done. And the tracks seem to have them. You know, Jerry there at the Dells has them quite a bit there. It looks like, and you know,
right.
Yeah, and that fills a void for them. You know, they have them, you know, the races for Wallback and Nabafelt and them guys like that. So that's a good thing to keep all that going. I think the Deachen's race is going to be there this year.
Yes, the Dells and on their CWRA. Yeah, that was pretty cool.
Yeah.
Now, when you started Midway, and then, you know, another job on top of Motomart, and then you were no longer the president of CWRA. Were you kind of done with CWRA and then being directly involved with racing at that point?
I had, when I got out of the CWRA, I didn't go to a race for, I bet you, 4 years.
Okay.
I didn't go to a track or nothing. And actually, we got that CWRA, or the Midway machine started.
Yep.
And of course, that took a lot of new business and getting that all off the ground. And then Cody Knutson.
Yep.
So Cody and Rock's boys, they wanted to go motocrossing.
Oh, right.
So I had bought a motor home and Rock bought a trailer. So we took them kids motocrossing.
Right.
So, and we had a blast. That was a great time. And, you know, Midway was doing a lot of cylinders for the motocross racers.
Okay.
Yeah. So that sort of fit into what, you know, our business a little bit, you know, it was a little bit of our business. And so we had a good time. It was a lot of fun. And so we did that. God, I don't know. What did Cody say? Maybe 3 years full time?
Yeah, something like that.
We didn't miss a race. Yeah. We were everywhere, every weekend, 2 races on a weekend.
Yeah, it was two different tracks in a weekend, right?
Yeah. And all over. Yeah. We'd be up in Michigan and all over the joint. We'd get back late Sunday.
Yeah.
You know, and Rock worked for American, his whole thing there, and they had early mornings, you know. Mm-hmm. We might get home, and he might have to be up in the UP at 4 in the morning, you know. So it was just a great time. I really enjoyed that. Yeah, it was a lot of fun doing that.
Now, with all those years at Moto Mart, I mean, did you just start from, like filling up cars to
I started. This is no lie. We pumped the gas. Probably people won't even remember this. I was going to watch this show, but we pumped the gas and we had to wash the windshield.
Okay.
And then we had, and there was maybe 5 different cigarettes back then.
Okay.
And I think that's about all we sold. So if somebody wanted a pack of cigarettes, we'd have to run in the building and grab that. But we collected all the money out there on the island. There was really no credit cards back then. And so we did that. And then we got so busy that we couldn't, we quit washing the windshield. All we did was put the gas in. Well, we got busy. We couldn't do that. So then it went to self-serve, but we sat out there and collected because we had to get the cars off the driveway. I mean, I look back at what them gallons did at that store back in the day. And then, so there was no convenience stores yet then.
Okay.
So we started, I got hired as manager right when I graduated. So I turned 18 and I got the manager's job. So I told my supervisor, I said, well, we should put a couple coolers in here and put gallons of milk. So we started selling gallons of milk, and then we sold dog food, bags of 25-pound dog food. It was generic dog food, but sold tons of it. And anyways, we're selling all this other stuff, and of course now there's more cigarettes in that. The people are pumping the gas. We're still going out there, and we'd bring them the stuff, and we'd collect for it. And then finally they decided, well, we need to build a full store. The convenience stores were just starting.
Okay.
That would have been early 80s.
Okay, gotcha.
Yeah,
gotcha.
82 or something in there. So we built that first building, and that was Moto's first convenience store.
Really?
Yeah.
The one right in Plover?
Yeah, and we're in 6 states, and right now they have 100 and some stores. Back then there must have been about 30 some at that.
Okay.
But they were just gas stations.
Yeah.
So, but we were the first store, and it took off, and then they started building them. And so then it wasn't too long I got to be a supervisor. They were building them in Minnesota and Wisconsin, so I had a pretty big territory. And so I was traveling a lot. And, our Minneapolis store is in the real bad part of town.
Okay.
And that's where, when they had the riots, the George Floyd riots, and the precinct that they burned down, that's right next to our store there.
No kidding.
So, but our owners, when all that was going on, our owners hired a security firm with guns. And they boarded the store up, but they sat there with guns, and we didn't get burned down. They burned all our competition down because they burnt almost that whole.
No kidding.
Yeah, and now that store now does huge numbers because no one's ever really rebuilt, and it's not in a very good neighborhood. But so that was one of my stores. So yeah, that's how it started. So I was there 43 years. Family owned. They're out of St. Louis. Just good people. They went to a couple races if they were ever up here in the summertime, and when I was racing, and just a good family, and to stay in a job 43 years, you'll never have anybody do that anymore, and it was a great job. I had one bad year, and that was the last year I worked, and that was the COVID year.
Oh yeah,
and it was just it created so many issues. You just had a lot more issues that you had to deal with that you didn't have before.
Right.
And I was retiring, so I got through that year pretty good. So
yeah,
everything worked out pretty good.
So then, what year did you go vintage racing? What year did the itch come back?
Let's see. That was 2000. I think that was 2011.
2011. Okay.
Yeah.
Now and then your brother Rex went back vintage racing. Who had the vintage car first?
I did, and this is a real great story. So I started going back to the races.
Okay.
Okay, and I started watching them, and
And the thing that I'll acknowledge too that on here is, you and Danny Summers with Midway Machine, you guys sponsored me on and off for several years of my career, and then came, were a part of my super late model career. And
we sponsored your grandfather, but we helped when you first started with Kevin. Well, I knew Kevin real good.
Yeah.
Kevin Lang, but anyways, so I'm going to the races, and they got vintage cars one night. Well, here's this Bob just sold a Nova. Well, I had known Bob and raced against him, and
Kevin Lang always talked about him a lot.
Yeah, Kevin was Bob's right hand man.
Yeah.
So here's this Jim Highland had got Bob's Bemco Nova, and that car was never, I don't think, damaged ever bad. And Jim redid the car. He has a for sale sign on it. So I thought, boy, an old Bemco car. This is exactly what I want. So I went down there. Well, we couldn't get together on price. So I kept hammering on him, and he kept turning me down. So John Elft, he gets an old Bemco car, a Camaro, which was Larry Smith's 73 Mustang originally, an old Bemco car, and I knew all them guys. So Elf has this car. I know he traded, John. So I make a deal, and I buy this Camaro. Bless you.
Thank you.
So Rick Adams and me and Rex go pick this up from John Elf. We bring it back to my house. And once again, these phone calls, Jim Highlands calls me about an hour later.
Not kidding.
Says, hey, I'll sell that car for what you offered. I says, now you got I'll give you this car and this much cash. You got to take this other Bemco car and so much cash. And he says, I think I'll do that, because he wanted another project.
Okay.
So,
oh gosh,
Ricky comes, we load the car up, and Jim's in Minnesota. So we haul that car to Minnesota, get the Nova. So I made a deal with Rex. It didn't need much, but I said, you help me get working on this thing. And, of course, you want to be competitive. And I said, you can drive it some of the time. I said, you can drive it at Milwaukee and a couple of the other races. So he said, okay. So we put that car together, and we go vintage racing. I could tell we were at the track 10 minutes, and Rex, he wanted his own car. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So Rex is sort of looking for a car. And he got to drive Milwaukee and a couple other races, so we're getting through that year.
Did you just not want to do Milwaukee?
I didn't want to care to do it, no.
Okay.
And he wanted to.
Had you ever ran Milwaukee?
No.
Okay.
No, it was one of the few places I didn't. I had ran, we had gone to Grundy, and I had been there, and Rockford and Elko, and them were tracks I had been
to. Okay.
So I could tell right away. So Jim Highland gets this Camaro done. We're racing over there, and he puts a for sale sign on it. The one that I had traded.
Yep.
Rex buys it. So Ricky Adams has got to go back over to Minnesota, pick that car up, bring it back to Plover. That went back and forth, I don't know how many times.
Yeah.
And Rex put a different stub on it. He wanted his own type of stub on there, and so he did some work on it, and he got going, and then we were vintage racing. So that was 5 or 6 years we vintage raced. And I talked about it before, that claustrophobia.
Yeah.
Was sort of starting to bother me a little bit. And it was bothering me even when I was snowmobiling, which I never really, sometimes I'd have to open up on a full shield. But in that vintage car, it sort of started bothering me. But, some of them days are real hot. And then that was them old stock Chevrolet stubs on them Bemcos. And they were built way too rigid, but that's how everybody built their cars.
Yeah.
And anytime you took them old Chevrolet stubs into the wall, it would knock the fuel pump off and usually catch a fire. And that was always in the back of my mind. And now I've put weight on, and you're older. I'm approaching 60 years old. I'm thinking, can I get out of this thing? If, say, a throttle hung up and say you got on your roof. So it's that last year, it really bothered me. And then the vintage racing sort of made a turn there. We were moving around there pretty quick, and we had some squirrels, I guess you'd maybe call them. I mean, it was getting a little
Yeah, you
Gary
and
out
Rex
there.
were competitive.
Yeah, and we were competitive. We were winning a lot of the races, and we were going at it good. And so I had won the September race at Plover, and I thought of selling. I should just sell this car right now and end it there. I forget. We went to one more race, maybe down the Dells, and I was just sort of, I had my fill of that and crawling around on the cement. And your dad would come and help me on that car. And here's two old guys working around. I had Billy Honecker and Scotty Iden helping me, and Doug Krasitsky helped me out a ton. So here were us old guys. So after the races at the Dells that night, I went and told Rex, I said, just so you know, after the fest, I'm going to put this car up for sale in the truck, and I'm going to get out of this vintage race. He said, I'm thinking of the same thing. So after the fest, Monday after the fest, I sold the car, and by Friday after the fest, I had the truck and the extra motor sold. So that's how everything went pretty good out of the racing business. So it was, went pretty good.
Yeah, and you had that truck that, it was a newer truck, a newer Ford that you could drive up on. Where did you find that?
Danny found that because, see, that's what I sort of had. I had one of them ramp trucks when I was racing super late. Yeah. So when I was going back to vintage, I said, I'm making this look like it should,
Right. Yeah.
So I told Danny what I wanted. Well, Danny went to look in Bloomfield, Iowa, middle of nowhere, a car dealership. I don't even remember the name. And they had this truck for sale. So Danny called them up, and they haggled back and forth. And I made the deal on a Saturday morning, and it was almost the Missouri border in Iowa. So on a Saturday morning, I drove my car, and I drove down there, and this dealership was out in the middle of dirt roads. This town, dirt roads,
okay,
which Iowa has a lot of that. I didn't know that. So here we are. So I make the deal on the hauler. I drive my car up on the hauler and drove it home. Had a little more rust than I wanted to, but Davey Schreffer, a good friend of ours at Daveco in Plover, him and Rex and Rock, they said, well, we can fix this bed up. We can get that rusting.
Sure.
So they went to work on that bed, and they had that fixed in a week. And that had that 7.3 Ford diesel, which is bulletproof. That truck went down the road like it was great. It was just a great truck. Had miles on it, but it was well maintained. And so then I had it all lettered up like the olden days. We had all the tracks on there.
Yeah.
I put all the CWRA the way it was. And,
I remember that. Yeah.
Yeah, and I had lettered it up real nice, and but that's what I wanted to do. Because that's vintage. That's, got to sort of play the part.
Speaking of my dad helping me, I love this story. It makes me laugh every time I think about it. I was still living at home, and I think my dad went with you guys down to Madison, and I think he hey, I'll come down and I'll drive the hauler.
Sure.
And it's like, I was young, and I think I was, I don't remember if we had built our car, if I was running for Gary Kovaleski at the time. I don't remember which years those were, but I remember my dad got home at I don't know if it was 5:30 in the morning.
Yeah, it was. Yeah, I think
Saturday.
It was. Well, Madison, of course, there again when I'm going back. So Madison, we stopped at White Rock.
Yep.
So Dave Gruenberg owns that. Dave.
Yep.
So anything after Madison, he didn't own it years ago, but there again when I was racing, we would stop at Madison.
You guys were racing vintage, but weren't acting vintage.
Yeah, no, we and then I don't think your dad was with us, but your dad did go with me we had a few of them lacrosse races, and one night we get over to lacrosse, and here comes rain, so we sit there, and they canceled them pretty early, so I said on the way home, I think I said every bar on the left we would stop.
Yeah.
Maybe your dad was with us. I
think
remember.
So.
I think he was.
Yeah.
So sure enough, we stopped at every bar on the left, and then I think we did make one or two on the right on the way.
But, ran out of left side bars.
Yeah, and we just, that was just what we did in the day, and just good times. And I can remember a real good story in the vintage deal there. We was racing Marshfield one night. And, I always dressed even when I was in the late model, in the old days, all my guys always had a nice dress shirt at the end of the night. And, we looked like we belonged, So that's how I ran the vintage thing. So Rex did the same thing. So we're done at Marshfield, and I say, well, let's go on the square and point. He's got to go through point. So we stopped on the square. That's all the college kids. So I forget the name of that bar there we go into. And
was it the Outfit?
Not the Outfit, but I know them guys. We did go there, but it was across the street. And so this girl comes up, this college girl she goes, are you guys a bowling team? Our shirts look like bowling shirts. And I said, no, we're racers. I said, there's the cars. And she said, she couldn't believe it. She said, what do you do with them? I said, we race them in a circle. It was way over her head, but it was a blast. And then, everybody's out looking at these cars, and, it was sort of a different deal. So we always had fun, doing things like that, stopping after the races. We didn't, when we were doing it a lot, maybe we didn't go every night, because from lacrosse you had to get it. When I started work early in the morning, a lot of times I had high school kids with me, when they were playing hockey and that. So we had to watch ourselves a little bit. But if we had a night a rain out, or a night that we got done early, or something where we could go out and have fun, we did it. You
got to do that.
We I got to tell you a great story about your dad.
Perfect.
That's one night where this is when we started traveling with our hobby stocks.
Okay.
We're pretty competitive. We could go places. So we had a Saturday afternoon special at Wausau.
Okay.
So Brian was there, and your dad was there, and I was there. And then I told your dad, I said, after this, we'll go to Tomahawk. Because Tomahawk had a little thing going on.
This is how I know it's going to be a good story. When you start talking about Tomahawk and hobby stocks.
So your dad said, yeah. And Brian says, no way. Brian says, we're supposed to go home. We got to get Dad's car ready. It was one of the red, white, blue races was the next day at Kaukauna. And Beard had your grandpa's hauler on top of it. Brian had a trailer.
Okay.
So Beard said, we'll go race. We'll be right home, So Brian, he was mad at Beard. So Brian went home. We go up to Tomahawk. And I think the only couple guys from our area was Beard and myself. So we and we were never really well accepted up there a lot. It was, we usually had our battles on our hands.
They had their bunch, yeah.
Yeah. So we're racing.
Were they giving you guys money to come up there?
No.
Okay.
No, Raleigh Hodge was the promoter.
Okay.
And he was down the pits, and he said, hey, I want you to come on up. He might have gave us a couple pit passes.
Okay.
I think he did that. And because he said, hey, I want you guys after the race. And maybe Dean Fisher went up too with us. I can't remember. But so we go up there, and your dad and I are in the same heat. And I forget what happened. I think your dad was up towards the front, and he got into it with a guy, and they're going right at it. Their fenders are getting knocked in, and so we get in the pits, and of course we're parked next to each other. So your dad gets out of the car, and he grabs a tire iron right away, and he's, your dad's just a little high strung now and then. And so he's looking for this guy that bashed him around there. And I'm trying to hold on to no, we don't need to do this, And I think we calmed your dad down. But then races got done, and I don't know, we're pretty young guys. And I said, well, we stopped at a little bar. There was a little bar right next door, had a couple beers, nothing crazy. And your dad has to get back with that truck. So he got back late, 3 a.m. or something. He gets back there, and your grandpa left a big list for him.
Okay.
this is what you got to do. And then you got to take the truck and gas it up, and you got to, so your dad had to stay there that whole, and then I think your grandpa made him go to the races.
Probably.
Yeah. I don't think he got a break not to go to so I think Beard, I don't know if he went in anymore after that, but we had a great time. I can remember one time in them cars, and your grandpa was in Bryan's, and he was hot lapping, and I was out ahead of him. So I'm way over driving this car thinking, well, I'm going to show, I'm going to stay ahead of Tom. Well, I lost it, and I went off the back straightaway in them woods.
Oh, no kidding.
But I never hit a tree or nothing. I was just up in them woods. And Tom stopped up there and says, "Are you okay?" And I'm going, "Yeah." I think I ended up backing out of there. And, but yeah, them was a lot of fun them days.
Yeah.
It really was. And everybody had a lot of knowledge to, we were running big carburetors on them cars, big Hollies.
Sure.
We were on that 7-inch tire. It took a lot to drive them things because it was all big power, or, at least I had good power. And it was a real good division, very competitive.
Yeah. People knew how to work on and build motors from their street cars, so that's what you did, yeah.
And you ran to the junkyards and got stuff, and I always told Brian and Beard that they were using Tom's Javelin motors, as AMC stuff.
Sure.
But it was good, a lot of fun. Yeah, a lot of good times.
Whether it was, hobby stocks, vintage, or super late models, what was your favorite place to go and race at?
Boy, I really liked them all. I'd say probably the favorite place was probably the Dells.
Okay.
It was a nice facility it was.
Yeah.
Probably the best track I did at was probably Wausau,
Had the most success at?
Yeah, because, there it didn't take a whole lot of money to, you know what I mean? It just, especially in the late models there. I did like the big tracks. I really loved Madison, and I liked La Crosse. And I didn't do the best, I didn't have probably the most competitive cars for that, but that one year at Madison, that was early on, one of them cars, and I didn't go there a whole lot, but that one year I never finished a race. I would get.
Oh, really?
Oh, I was having trouble with Rocky Breezer a little bit, and Rocky gave a lot of people problems, but but Rocky was a great guy. But so I know first couple of weeks there, me and him just seemed to, we were like a magnet, and so we were having trouble. But I would probably say my favorite would probably be Madison.
Okay.
Racetrack.
Yeah.
When you talk about a perfect built racetrack, I think now you need the killer motor there.
Yeah.
The small tracks are definitely easier on equipment, but at Madison you sort of come down a hill off the turn, so you're sort of gaining speed, and you go down the back straightaway, even the front, and then when you come up the turn, you sort of climb up, to help slow the car. How you come in them turns, and it was just a great designed place.
Yeah.
You can pass, and it's changed a little bit now. Now they run so low. Them supers do.
Right. Yeah. Hug right to the bottom. Yes,
yeah.
Especially coming off. Right?
Yeah. Now the trucks, I don't think you guys are as crazy on the bottom, are you?
Some guys. Yeah, I was watching some people run higher up, and they were faster than me and making it work, and I was running slower doing that. So
sure, everywhere you hit it.
But. Yeah, it's a momentum thing. Yeah, they got it figured out a little better than I do. But yeah,
I did like Rockford though.
Okay.
Yeah, I did like Rockford.
So one place I wish I could have had a shot at.
That was a great place. Now I went there one time with a super late, and I got rained out. So the only time I ran there was with the vintage.
Okay.
But I had gone there a ton of times, working with Albert. And I just, that was always sort of my favorite place, of just a old racetrack that has a lot of history and
for sure.
And I like Kaukauna too. I couldn't get around there worth you know. I know one time I went there, Albert, I think that was our first year, and Albert said he was going to take his name off the truck because I was so slow. He goes, I'm taking my name off this truck when we leave.
Oh, I can't believe Albert would have said that.
Yeah, he gave me trouble all the time. I mean, we bantered back and forth quite a bit, but yeah, I like that. I just couldn't, that place has its own how to get around there too,
right.
But
now those vintage cars, you guys never went to Hawkeye Downs with those, did you?
Nope.
Okay.
Nope. We went to Elko, Grundy, Rockford, everything here in Wisconsin.
Okay. Yeah, I hadn't remembered that. Well, this past weekend, I just got to go to Hawkeye Downs. Man, what a fun little
nice place.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Nice facility. I wish I could have had more time to look around the facility, but that was a great racetrack. I loved it.
Are them Flex still the promoter? Do you know?
I don't know. I know the guy, whoever the guy was that greeted me when I pulled in the pits was nice as could be and knew my name, but I don't know.
They were racers.
Okay.
Dudley was a racer, Artco racer, and his dad was the promoter, and I think he passed. I think Dudley was promoting it, but I haven't seen them guys in years.
Okay.
But it is a great place. It's sort of right in town like it is.
Yeah, there's a lot around it.
Yeah, it is. Just a great setup, a great little track. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, good racing too.
Yeah, it was a fun track to race at and pass at. Outside worked well. It was maybe a little tough to get to someone's outside, but like on a restart, it was. I mean, if you started on the outside on a restart, I was looking forward to it. I'm like, yeah, you can motor around there pretty good.
You can go, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's good. Have you been to Elko?
Once, and it was, and I actually loved it, and I never ended up making it back there. It was the night when my grandpa Dick and John Begeman all got inducted into their Hall of Fame.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that was, and Dick was still alive and around, and all three of those guys were there. So that was the only time I went there, and I think I was in Gary's car, and I think we had a pretty fast car, and I ended up someone ended up tagging the wall up out of 4, and then came into my right front, and then we kind of just rolled around after that. But it was a fun track. I liked that.
Yeah. Yeah, that is. It's a good place.
Yeah, and beautiful facility. The grandstands.
Yeah, it is, and everything's paved, and
right.
It is just a great place.
And did you see that they sold out?
Yeah,
I don't know what'll go on there.
I get nervous when that happens.
Yeah,
I get nervous, and the Ryans had that. And they had that for quite a few years.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's who had it, Ryan and Fredrickson's there or something, and you get a little nervous when you see that because you just don't know, And they say it is. They say it's going to stay the track, so I guess time will tell. It'd be a shame if it didn't,
Yeah. I mean, what would Minnesota have left? Nothing.
That would be it, I was over to that other, of course, Raceway Park, the old place in Shakopee. I was there a bunch of times, and then Sauk Center was that other track way out on 90, was it? And that closed up now some years ago. That was an asphalt track.
Okay.
Yeah. So they ran a couple Artco shows out there. So, yeah, you just, you hope these places survive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, being someone that has been involved in racing, been around racing, having been a president of a club and, raced himself, what... It's a very, very difficult question, but, what, if there's some sort of, not that you can't do things the way that they were 40 years ago,
right.
But, is there anything that, you recognize or think about, from back when racing, let's just say 80s time frame, or maybe when short track racing was at its peak, that, hey, this was going on then, and, it's not really going on now, that could be feasible, that would make things a little better. It's a really difficult question to answer, but
one thing, you're not going to reel the technology in.
Nope.
And I don't know if I'd really want. I mean, it's progressed, and these cars are just unreal now, and I don't think there's no stopping that. There might be something to do with shock rules or something like that. I don't know if that's the way. I don't like this. I don't like this practicing how they do. I mean, I think that's out of control, and I think that's such a huge expense, and it adds to the weekend, and especially when you let them practice the day before, and they're burning these tires up, and I don't get it. I would rather, if I was a promoter, I would limit practice a lot, and then I would give them not the tires they burn up in practice, because that's crazy what some of them guys do, but I would give them maybe another 2 or another set for the race to make these races, to put more strategy in the race. If they're going to buy these tires and just waste them practicing, I'd rather let the fans maybe see a little bit better race when their tires are wore out, where they get another change with 40 to go or something.
Okay.
I think they have to think about doing something like that and really limiting this. And they should be one-day shows. Now, you talk about a thing that can help expenses. You know what I mean?
Right.
Especially a lot of these guys now, they feed their crews and all this. And, it gets to be maybe not so much here in Wisconsin, but some of these races, they're banging away for almost a week. And
right.
And it just, a normal guy, years ago, a normal guy could think of maybe running down the snowball. Not the way it's now. In a lot of these races, it's just not. It should be a one day. You get there in the morning, and I don't know, maybe an hour of practice or something, or just limit it. And because boy, if you can't get dialed in now, and I see it because I watch Race Monitor a lot, and these guys are hammering away all day, and some guys dial themselves right out. You can see they just start backing up, and the day gets hotter.
Right.
And then they're going to race at night, but they're running around in 90-degree heat, and it's going to be 70 degrees or 65 degrees, and I just don't. I think there'd be a lot of room for savings there. I really do. I never, one little small thing, and we never, our car owners would have never allowed that, was warming tires up. We went out. You got the one to go, and you.
Oh, so like before the race starts?
Yes.
Okay.
And we were told you better learn how to drive that car. And if you pile drived it in on cold tires and took out 4 or 5 guys, I think you'd be in big trouble. Mm-hmm. Our tires were aired up, a lot more. They weren't soft, and we had to prepare to race. And the first couple of laps, there usually was a little bit more passing because we were going in the turn so much slower because, we didn't have.
You knew what to expect, yeah.
Yeah, but we drove the cars that way.
Right.
And now they say, oh, we can't do that. Well, that just gets me to, I know the Dells, and I don't know if you were involved in that when they went on that 80 tire.
Yep, I went and ran down there, yeah.
Yeah, and that might not be the right thing to use, but when they ran on that 80 tire, then everybody just screamed how hard it was, and everybody hated it. And, I went to a race, I think that first night they were on that 80, because they only lasted a few weeks, didn't they?
I think they ran it for a full year.
Oh, did they run the whole year?
That was kind of it.
But the warm-up, I think we counted 9 warm-up laps.
Yeah, I can believe it, because that's what it took to get them.
Yeah.
To get them working.
And see, and then everybody gave that thing a bad tire, and I don't know if that tire was treated all that fair. I'm just thinking drive the car. You know what I mean? But maybe that thing was too hard.
It was in my opinion, it was a very hard tire. I mean, I struggled. Dells has never been one of my best tracks. I love the Dells, but it's never been one of my best tracks. I struggled to qualify on those tires, and especially in the early part of that year.
Sure.
Well, then I realized, guys are going out at the last practice, throwing 10 laps on them, and then getting ready to go qualify. And I was like, that's what I need to be doing too. I was, I would think I was going out there and throwing 2 laps on them or something like that, scuffing them. And so, I did that, and then, that helped a little bit. But they raced. I remember them racing really well.
Yeah, I thought the races were okay.
Yeah, I didn't mind them at all during the race. I thought they stayed consistent. especially when you weren't bolting, 4 new tires on every week. I can't remember what exactly they did, because Wayne Lensing had the track at that point, and we would get, I don't remember if there was a limit on tires, what we could do, but he would give us a rebate. Hoosier or something wouldn't let him sell tires for a certain price point, but he would give us like a rebate on every single tire that we bought. So everyone got like a check at the end of the year.
Oh,
that ran, I don't know, probably the full season or whatever, but or 75%. And yeah, they were a good tire, but yeah, those ones definitely did. They definitely did take a lot of laps to get warmed up. Could you have, went out, dropped the green pretty quick and been just fine? Yeah, it just, everyone would have been dealing with the same cards, so it would have been what it is. But yeah, and actually right now, I'm doing that Midwest truck deal, and they're on the 1070s, and I started running those, and I was like, man, I can see why. I think like Lacrosse has been running their NASCAR late models on there for a long time. I can see why they run that tire. I think it's fantastic.
Great.
And yeah, I think it's a fantastic tire. Stays consistent, and that tire does not take as much to warm up. I think comes in much faster. A new tire comes in much faster than what an F80 did.
Yeah, yeah. So that 1070, that's something that should be looked at then, maybe. What I'm saying, because it always seems like tires are a big problem.
Yeah, and I can't remember if Marshfield tried that one for a year. I don't remember.
Sure.
I don't remember.
Yeah, it's another thing probably, you talk about what, and maybe there is, but I don't see a lot of, and maybe you can allude to this, but I don't see. Years ago, the drivers handled basically the pits. We handled our rules, and we told the promoter, this is what, what I mean?
Right.
And we handled our tire deal, what I mean? We had distributors, like Janelle's and the Alberts of the world. And
right.
But like the rules, how do the rules, how do they get spread apart? So each track's making their own, or do they have driver input, or?
Yeah, I know the 2024 when I went to, and I was probably a person that probably guilty. And when people would have rules meetings, really not going to them.
Sure.
I probably had the attitude of, I think probably for a while I had the attitude of probably like, well, no one wants to hear what I have to say anyway, or maybe I just didn't have much of an opinion.
Sure.
Or it's like, well, if I go, like, they're not going to make a change anyway, which is probably not the right attitude to have. But, I know Golden Sands, when I ran in 2024, they had a rules meeting. I know they had one this just past year, and got people together. And it's like, still only, the turnout for people is only so good. I'm not sure what every track really does. I know, Kaukauna got their club over there. I don't really, know how that all works. And then, I don't know if really people are, I don't think the UMA, I don't know if the UMA is still a thing. I know that was,
I'm not sure
that
either.
was kind of more of a, I don't remember. That was, maybe it wasn't last year in 2024. There was, people were kind of jumping all on the same rules. I think that maybe that was 2024. A lot of people started jumping back in the same rules again, but then you started seeing like, oh, one track would allow this other little thing, so it really wasn't the same.
Yeah.
But I don't know if every track is, having drivers meetings or what. Probably the thing in that regard is, all of the tracks and all of the drivers should kind of just be one meeting, kind of a deal, and make an event out of it.
It's so hard, and racers could be their own worst enemy.
100%. Yep,
they really can, but
they are. We are.
I don't know. There's some things that go on that I know if your grandfather had been around, it would have got stopped right then and there. You know what I mean? Different things that I hear that happen, and that's what I wish there'd maybe be more of a stronger driver presence on, on the rule stuff, and maybe that way they could maybe get closer together.
Yeah, and I think probably some of that, the driver presence, I think is, would be a really good thing. I think that's probably one thing that's different from, 80s, 90s is, yeah, you had car owners, back in those times as well, but I think you probably have, I don't know, maybe I'm right, maybe I'm wrong, but maybe you have some less people that are racing that they don't spend their money on their car, so it's it's a little bit different viewpoint, a little different opinion, and
a lot of them.
Granted, I was certainly a person that was the opportunities I was afforded were, my parents spent a lot of money for a lot of years, and then I was able to continue it on myself for a while, and I too, we're sitting here trying to, guess what maybe an answer is, or maybe what would be one improvement. And I like asking this question to people that I respect and that have been around a while, but because I think it's something that needs to get talked about and should be talked about. But yeah, it's a hard thing, and the technology,
And how do you turn that or stop that?
Yeah, and it's because honestly, it's one of the things you have these, load machines, and you have, these load sticks and all this other different stuff.
Right.
And I like that. I like technology. Sure. I like all that stuff. And I've had times when I had access to data acquisition, and my uncle has a shock dyno, and not everyone has some of that sort of stuff. And I like all that, and a lot of it all takes time to do. And yeah, I wouldn't want that to necessarily go away. I wish I could, afford to do more of it, but
sure.
It's tough.
And I think being your younger racer, I'm sure that's the younger mindset and that's me being an old timer. I'd say the technology is fine. I mean, you definitely got to stay in that game and keep people interested, and I hope Wisconsin is still one of the better states in the short track world.
And I think they are. I
think we are. We've maybe fallen a tad, but I think if push comes to shove, we're there, and so we don't want to lose ground on anywhere in the country when there are specials and when you can go to them and things like that. And boy, that's a loaded question, because
it is.
You'd sure like to,
Now I know. Have you been going to some of those like ASA national races, or at least watching them?
Yeah. I've been to quite a few of them, and I really appreciate what Sargent's trying to do.
Mm-hmm.
I really do. And he's trying to bump the purses up there, which we need, which, when they first started, they made a couple bad calls, didn't go their way very well in race calls and things like that, and people jumped on them for. Sure. But I think all in all, it's a good series. Now, they're running tonight. I looked at practice. I think there was 24 cars there, which isn't the worst. I just thought there'd be more mindset of somebody trying to run that a little bit more. And they came with that incentive program this year.
I did see that, yes.
And I think they got 12 or 13 guys lined up on that. So that definitely helped. They're heading in the right direction. I was around when the asphalt was the number one thing, and the dirt really didn't have much going on at all. Now it's flipped. The dirt has all the big sponsors. They have everything going their way, the huge purses, traveling teams, two basically big series, and then all the little series when they're in town they run. They have all that going on, and somehow they seem fairly unified, and somehow we're not, that's where we should be gearing. And I think Sargent wants that, but he there again, I think racers are sometimes our worst own enemy. Sometimes he catches flack that he shouldn't be.
Sure.
If that makes sense.
Yep.
Saying it that.
And I think probably it's kind of some sort of wave of attraction where, I think, you have, because there's a lot of big corporate sponsors around the dirt world.
Yeah.
And when a racer gets a corporate sponsor, obviously it helps that particular racer, but, you have, I'm just going to say like Lucas Oil on the side of,
right.
A dirt late model, probably a dirt super late model, probably a sprint car. Well, okay, well, another corporate sponsor comes and another and another and another, and it, builds the racers, it builds the, the whole series. And I think that's probably one of the key pieces is having asphalt racetracks and asphalt race teams and cars be a place that large businesses want to be a part of. And if you don't really, if you yourself just don't have one hell of a job and money from somewhere, it's hard to do that.
Yeah. One thing, like, and I've gone to some dirt races. I've been going to,
and I have never been to one. Well, I'd like to go to one, but
like when they're the specials over at Cedar Lake.
That's right.
What you
like
have
to
do. You have to. So you go over there, and there again, there's a couple series that are battling. Lucas and I forget World of Outlaws is that the same one.
Mm-hmm.
But the drivers, the real good drivers, now they've got their own T-shirt sales or their own trailers.
I notice it's very common with them guys.
They have these rows set up for the fans, and then there's a couple big trailers that have all the other guys. Just about anybody racing there that night has apparel, and these guys make, from what I understand, are making like Davenport and them guys. Them are their workers. They own that deal that are selling, and they're traveling, so they're footing the bill, feeding them people, and putting them up in hotels, and I mean they're making money. There's lines, and especially when they come to autograph, and so the asphalt's nothing. And then I ask the guy that sells the stuff around here, and it's just hard to coordinate everybody, but some tracks won't allow to sell this track, in the asphalt world.
Mm-hmm.
It's just like, too many rules or whatever like that we can't get all on the same page.
Sure.
Because another thing in the dirt world, when I go to a dirt race, you take your ticket, which isn't bad price at all. It's, you go to a good dirt race and you're paying somewhat close to what our good asphalt shows are.
Okay.
And you take that ticket and you go down the pit gate, and another $5 get you in that pits for as long as you want to stay.
Interesting. Okay.
They're real fan friendly, but of course, them guys, the apparel means a lot to them. So they got all these fans that are buying, and they're running down there. And if the drivers buy his car, they're getting this stuff signed if he didn't do an audit. It's more fan friendly. The tracks, Deer Creek, you go over there, and they have hawkers in the stands. Now, the hawker is the person selling concessions.
Yeah. Yeah.
You know what I mean? They'll sell you your 6-pack of beer, a 12-pack. They'll sell your candy, your stuff. It's all on them. And, hardly any asphalt. I don't know if any asphalt tracks do that anymore.
Yeah, I certainly haven't seen it in a long time.
But the dirt world, you see it a lot. So there again, that's a little more fan friendly. You know what I mean?
You don't got to go sit in a line.
No, I just see a few things like that hopefully the asphalt world that we can get, and Bob Sargent's a great promoter. I mean, what does he promote? About 100 and some races a year. He's the
really? I didn't.
Yeah, he's the weekly promoter at Nashville, but he has all these dirt races, and then he does. Well, he has the NASCAR truck race at Knoxville. He's the promoter there.
Okay. Yeah, I knew he had some NASCAR stuff.
Yeah, so he's so hopefully a guy like that could get us in that mindset, get the asphalt world, because I think we got a pretty good show to put out there. you know.
Right.
And the fans, anywhere I've been this year, we've had good crowds. Is the crowd tending maybe a little older? It is somewhat, but I still see the young people there.
Yeah.
And if we'd have looked at crowds 30 years ago, we'd have probably said, they're older. Well, you know, but so I think you'll always have that. But I'm seeing real good crowds. You know, look at Madison the other day. That was a great crowd.
Oh, the Joe Shee race?
Yeah, I was there for that
awesome.
race.
Fantastic.
So, so we have a lot of positives. We just have to try to mold that and get that. Because I still think we got a great show to get out there and where we can pay our guys. You know, where we can get our people paid, our racers paid, and, you know.
Yeah, and actually, you know, the whole T-shirt sales thing, you know, it kind of goes, and I'll ask another question, and then you probably have a similar answer to it, but thinking about the overall fan experience, and I remember when my uncle ran ASA, you know, there was, I remember a couple people having some trailers or something, you know, selling shirts, and you know, I was like, oh, heck yeah, you know, and yeah, I think that just kind of adds to the overall experience. And so I think, I don't know if there would be anything you'd add to this, but, you know, as someone that does attend a lot of races, you know, what makes and this is probably a better question to ask than, hey, what do you think should improve? But to you, what makes a good experience at a racetrack, and what makes a good race?
Well, I think right off the get-go, when you come to the gate, your price has to be fair. Now, I'm not one that has to be a real low price, because I feel you need to you have to charge what you feel that show is worth. So if you're thinking you're gonna throw a good show out there and you got a little higher tag, I'm never going to question that if I come through that gate, and it is. But I think concession prices, I think there again in the asphalt world are normal higher than what the dirt guys are. So I think our asphalt concessions are, now some of them run specials and that, and I think that's a good thing. You know, one thing, and I won't go anymore. I'm only wanting a couple divisions, 3 at the most.
Yeah,
I want them races done. I'm one of these guys that I want to be at that place for about 3 hours, and that's it. Now, the old fans years ago didn't really mind, but in the younger people now, you know, their attention spans 2.5, 3 hours. So I'm not just saying for me, but and I want it lined up, and I want it going. And we don't need big intermissions, and I guess the driver introductions in the cars is probably not the worst thing. You know, usually everybody's talking. It's hard to listen to the driver introductions anyways.
Sure. Okay.
But I mean, that can add to a show, and I understand that the promoter has to have that some leeway to sell them concessions. I get that, you know, but I want a show in and done, especially on a weekly show. I want to be out there by 10 o'clock, 9:30, 10. And I think you would ask, you know, and what just boils my blood is when you're at a show and all these divisions, and then they throw fireworks and stuff like that, and now it's huge late at night. And here's families leaving at 10 o'clock with the little ones sleeping.
Yeah.
You know, that just ruined it. You know, that ruined it for that family, and that's hard. How are you going to get them back? So a quick run show, organized, and I know you're going to have problems. You're going to have the big blowed motor that's going to cause issues.
Yeah.
You're never going to get around that, and everybody will understand that. But when you're diddling around and screwing around, you're asking for trouble with the new fan. And
yeah, if there's something I can completely agree with, it's having. Yeah, I mean, having the couple divisions, the 3 divisions, you know, and I know you want to have divisions for, you know, stepping stones and things like that, and you can rotate, you know, things throughout the year,
right?
And you know, maybe I'll have someone on here at some point that tells me, hey, well, this is why I need to have 5 or 6, and I'll see, but I don't think I'll ever really change my mind on that, anyways, but I had a lot of people that loved coming to watch me during Tundra Series races when it was 3 divisions.
Sure.
And like, hey, when you run another Tundra race, you guys only run 3 divisions. Can't wait to watch that.
In and out.
And exactly, exactly. I think that's a huge thing.
Right. Yeah, and when you're if you're running a 250 lapper. Now they ran. What did you guys have at just the 2 divisions? Right at the Joe Shear race.
Yeah, the
trucks and the supers.
Trucks did 36 because it was 36 for Joe Shear, and then we had
perfect race, perfect. The Dells, I think the Live for 5, I think are 3 divisions, and they run them pretty efficient. You know what I mean, so you're usually out of there, and I think it opens an opportunity for you for sponsorship too. If you can go to some of these bars and that and say, I'll have them people out here at 9:30, 10 o'clock on a normal night. And then, we can, I always thought and rotate it around, but, and I don't know if they do this anymore, but the guys that wanted to get paid cash just say, well, we're going to do it at Club Forest this night, or we'll do it at this bar in this town, or, you know what I mean? And switch it around. I mean, just trying to get that business involved. And it doesn't have to be a bar. It can you can do other things, but I just like a great show like that,
Yeah.
And I like good. Have you been to Jefferson?
Only to race.
Yeah. So this race, the Midwest Tour race is there Saturday, and I'll go down to that, and he'll run a couple more divisions than normal, but he's so efficient, and
okay.
And that facility is clean, and it's mowed grass, and it's all his buildings are painted, and he's got that big, beautiful bar, and his concessions, all his workers are in white. You know what I mean? It looks like something from...
I was really impressed the first time I ever went down there, just in general in Jefferson, just the race fans down there. I mean, those people, I mean,
there's
they were there
another
to
great
race.
town. There's a great area.
Yeah. They're
in. But like I say, it's never hard to find a worker there because they look from the 50s. It looks like when we were racing in the 70s. But I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. And his buildings are just so nice looking, and so and they've always sort of marched to their own tune. They always sort of ran their own pro late rules, and they are running, I guess, a couple more super specials than they used to over the years. But I think he can do it. I really do, and I think he draws good. I don't know their weekly race, and he must do okay because they did it for years, and they run. But just a great run place. So we'll go there. We'll go there Saturday night. And I know we'll be out of there early.
Okay.
Now
I know the Dassaus own it now.
Yep.
Have you in the last couple of years? Have you been to Slinger on a Sunday show?
Not on this. Let's see. I got to think about this. I did go to an opener here about 2 years ago, and then I've been to the Nationals.
Okay.
So I got there at least once a year, and then.
Okay. Yeah. So I had been to the Nationals a handful of times. I mean, that was still, gosh, that was almost 10 years ago now. Thinking about it, but they did a remembrance night. They do a remembrance night every year, and last year one of the people that they honored was my grandpa. So my uncle and I went down there. I was so impressed with the way they ran that show.
Yeah.
The checkered flag was flying. The cars were heading off the track. Last car was off the track, and the next.
Dang.
I mean, they were out, and and it was the same thing.
Was that a Sunday night?
Yeah.
Yeah. So you have to do that.
And I can't remember what time we were out of there, but I looked at my watch. I was like, man, we're already out of here. And this is a great night. And of course, there
Sure.
you have wrecks and there's stuff to clean up. And
yeah,
it was a really good night. I was like, and I don't go to a lot of races and just watch. So when I went there, I was like, wow, this is great.
Yeah. No, that says a lot. That says an awful lot. That, and then you'll go there. A guy will tend to go there more, knowing, I'm not going to be here all night. Then
Mm-hmm.
If you want to even get home and get to bed early, say you start work, or if you just don't want to spend all day at a track.
Yeah, you got an hour and a half drive back home.
Yeah, you might have a little bit, and that's another thing. It's with me, if I know I'm going to get out of there fairly good, I'll take a chance, and drive that couple hours because I know I'm going to make that up, getting on the road quicker. So, yeah, it's tough, and I understand they need that time to get them concessions to people, and because that's a very important part of their money making deal, and they need that stream, and so,
Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah.
Now, kind of jumping back a little bit. I mean,
Sure.
you talked about, all the years you spent racing with Albert, and you talked about what it was like. Albert Getzloff. You talked about all those years racing with him. Just in general, talk a little bit about how he was as a person. What was it like just hanging out with him? Because I was fortunate enough to, anyone that's ever gotten to know Albert Getzloff is fortunate, and man, was he hilarious, and just the one-liners and just countless things that are just hilarious that he would do and say.
Yeah. He was. Albert was a great guy, and he had a good heart.
Yeah.
And if he gave you a lot of crap, he usually liked you, and there was a way to read that. I could tell when he was, like young people, like young racers, he'd start in on them. And for the most part, he was, he liked them or was trying to but a lot of them took it the wrong way. So a lot of the first times didn't start off very good, but it was good. I mean, and there again, I just look back and thinking, Albert had, when he got that tire business from Bobby T, and then shortly after that, he got the Franklin Quick Change business from Darlene.
Okay.
So if you needed a Franklin Quick Change or the gears, you went through Albert. He was 5 Stars first dealer.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, he sold all the wheels. Stan Baumel, which was Bassett, but when he first started selling wheels, Albert sold the wheels for Stan, and he really, if he could have been a visionary or something, he could have set himself up like Wayne has in Rockford. He could have had a good parts warehouse and
sure. Yeah, I didn't know he had dealt all that at one point.
Well, Darlene had the Franklin deal out of their house, out of Dick and Darlene's house, and
no kidding.
Dick was racing a lot more and getting corporate sponsors, and that was taking a lot of her time, and she just sort of wanted to be done with it. And so Albert got all that. And I don't think he promoted it like he could have,
Sure.
Because like I said, if you were building a new car or whatever, you had to go through him, and he was a distributor. And so, things like that. So, I wish he could have been maybe a more visionary on it, and that would have helped his business and things like that. But like I said, he had a good heart. He helped out a lot of people. He helped me out a lot, especially that starting racing. And Vic helped out a lot too. Vic had to be pretty patient when we were first working on them cars, me and Bill. And, we weren't too good at mechanics. I was a real poor mechanic, and he had to teach us pretty much everything, and had to have the patience. Now, Albert didn't have any patience at all, so Vic had to do that. But they're again starting out. I can remember, Albert didn't have a lot of money. We would buy, if we stopped to get something to eat, we'd go to a deli at a grocery store, and he'd get sliced up ham and a loaf of bread and cheese, and we got sandwiches, And there was no money to stop at a McDonald's or nothing like that. It was just that's how things were. So,
hey, I did a lot of that. A lot of sandwich meat and cheese and at the races. Oh yeah.
Yeah, not like I bet you how we did. When Albert after he got rid of the truck or the car and the trailer, Janelle set him up with an old Ford. It was a tire truck around Wisconsin for years. Right. So. Janelle's had it. Janelle set him up with it. An old slant 6 in there, and Albert would be driving that. I remember we always stopped at that grocery store in Adams. I think it's closed now. He'd wheel in there, and of course we had changed tires pretty much most of the day. People would come by the house, and before we'd go to the Dells, and so he'd go buy that loaf of bread and that ham and cheese, and he'd be driving down that road with all that stuff sitting on the steering wheel or his stomach, and he'd hand you that. He'd make that sandwich, and he'd have his fingers with a Rue Glide where you could see it. But we were so hungry, it was the best tasting sandwich we ever had. I always said, "Oh, are we going to get another Rue Glide sandwich?" And he'd say, "I wash my hands," but just things like that I can remember sometimes that would go on. And yeah, he was.
Why wouldn't he let you make the sandwich?
Well, I don't know. He always had, and they needed, Vic would be sitting there, and but yeah, it was great times. I mean. That first couple years there, we even went to, we went one race to Toledo, Ohio one time.
Okay.
And it wasn't the Artco show. It was before that. And I believe it was an ASA race. And back then, McCurry came to an ASA race. Hoosier came. Firestone was still in it.
Okay.
Everybody came, and you put your best foot forward. Well, I can't remember. I think we had the McCurry guy couldn't make it or something. There was no McCurry guy to go to this show, so Albert goes. And this happened a couple of times. I know it happened at Rockford once, but we ended up, so we get there, and the McCurry ends up being the tire, works out, who's ever on it is way quicker, and so here everybody comes, and we sell all these McCurries out, Mm-hmm. We didn't work out. I know one time Rockford, I think it was Rockford, and they allowed that 1 year. They allowed everybody in. And whatever tire we had was we didn't know, no one knows until, practice starts and
okay.
The stopwatches start telling you who's the quickest, and then that's where everybody ran and bought their tires. And so, yeah, them were good times. It was just simpler times,
Yeah.
It was just simple times. You could run that business, and he did pretty well for himself. And yeah, but he had a heart of gold. He really did. He
helped a lot of racers out.
Yeah, he did. And I know some guys he would really get on, and they'd go to Clem and, say that guy just called me every name in the book and hollered at me, and Clem would come over and put him in line. And Mark Martin's first time to Wisconsin, lacrosse, and he was driving his Dillon car.
Okay. Yeah.
And it might have been maybe a second time, but it was a big race over at lacrosse. And so we're changing tires away. It's a big show. It's an afternoon race, Sunday afternoon. And Martin comes, and we put 4 tires on. And they go, and here they're right back. Nope, these aren't any good. And they're measuring again. Well, Albert's just mad, so we put 4 more on. They tear off. Here they come. Albert says, no. No, it don't work like that here. He goes, Trickle and them guys, they just usually grab a tire, and they'll put on, and Dick will run his hand over it, or, and we're not changing tires for you all day long. There's other people to take care of. And Ray Dillon sort of pushed his way past Albert, and Vic threw him right on the ground. Vic says, no, we're not changing no more tires. Well, Martin tore off, and here come Clem. And Clem said, you're going to change as many tires as they want, so we did, but, that's just how it was. And I'll never forget when Albert was barking at him, Albert says, well, Dick will probably beat you today anyways, and I think Dick did win that. It was sort of funny that, but, yeah, it was, we'd go to the shop, we'd go over to your grandfather's. That was always, we'd make the little round before the race. We try to get most guys shoot up, especially if there was a special. And the big hot thing there in the early days, in the late 70s, Firestone it was an IndyCar tire. It was actually their IndyCar tire, and the guys up here in Wisconsin was the first ones were putting them all on their left front. And when we would set a tire rule, we always left that left front open, where we'd let whatever you wanted to run, you could put on that left front.
Okay.
So that Firestone was the hot thing. Well, as the years went, then we're getting harder to get, because Firestone had backed out of IndyCar. And I can remember the fight over them tires, and Albert would just be screaming at these guys, and the guy would say, "You promised me one," and they weren't there, and there was always a lot of.
I think when I had Marv on, I think he was talking about him going somewhere and picking up a load of them. And
it was big. It was and
they were expensive too, right?
They were very expensive. Yeah. In the day, they were well over $100 in, I think. And they were so hard to get. They were, especially, like I said, Firestone had backed out. Mm-hmm. I forget what year out of Indy. Must have been early 70s.
Okay.
And then they just had a whole mess of these. And these guys around here in central Wisconsin, they had to have that small Firestone. And then when them sort of run out, everybody sort of went to a Goodyear, I think. There was a Goodyear was making just a tad smaller tire, and but I can remember, boy, and Albert would hold his ground, and he actually had when he would get them, he had to decide who was going to get them, or and them were good days. Yeah, that was a sought after tire though.
Yeah, I recently saw, I think it was, I don't know if it was News Channel 7 or News Channel 9 was recently out at the Trickle Memorial, whichever one it was. But I saw you up there talking on the mic. How was the Trickle Memorial reunion?
It was very good. It was a little lower key this year. Mm-hmm. They didn't have the concessions. Well, they had the food truck.
Okay,
and you could bring your own pop or beer and like that.
Yeah.
And they had music playing just with the DJ. No bands or nothing. And,
yeah.
But a real good crowd. Jeff Crowley and Vicky sort of organized it.
Okay.
All the guys, the directors are getting up there in age, and it's a ton of work. Look at the work your grandfather put in there. And I told Vicky and John, I was able to talk to them both, and I just told them that's one of them things, if it ever stops, it'll be hard to start up again. You know what I mean? So that if they keep it rolling, and I was surprised they had it started off cold, the crowd was down a little bit, but as soon as the weather warmed up, the crowd got pretty good, and they had a real good organization thing. They had a storytelling thing, and then they had a trivia. Okay. I'm still mad. I should have won the trivia. I still think I had a questionable answer go against me. So
were they all trickle questions? Or?
Yeah, they were all trickle trivia questions, and if I would have got this, I would have won, because I'd have had one less wrong answer than everybody else. But it was when he won that World Crown 300 down in Jefferson, Georgia, and I was at that race. They gave him a title, and I put the king, because they put a crown on his head, and they had this big, them old days, they'd hit you on the head with this thing and anoint you.
Yeah.
And they did that out on the track, and I think the guy that did that might have been the announcer, the promoter, said the king, So that's what I wrote for an answer. Well, they said you had to put the king of short track racing. And I guess the papers called him that after winning that crown. Okay. But I just put the king, and they didn't accept that answer.
Gotcha.
So then it went to an overtime, and I lost the overtime. But we had a great time. It was good. Got a lot of good people, older people,
Yeah.
People you haven't seen in many years, and so it's a great thing. And your grandfather was really the guy that got that thing rolling. And I mean, there's no racer around that has anything like that.
No.
It's just a neat thing. So if people are watching this and you haven't been there, you got to get out there and.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, anybody watching, listening, if you haven't been to the Trickle Memorial, it's worth the trip up, and if you're from out of town or whatever, it's cool. There's a lot of different signs to read and see. Just the things that the message from people donating, the messages that they
right.
wrote, and the pictures, and it's cool, and it's a nice, quiet, peaceful little town. So
yeah, it is. It's in a great location, and I get questioned a lot, and Dick Carth. I don't know if you know him.
Yeah.
He has a Trickle, the Trickle.
The Helig Myers.
Yeah.
Yep.
So he's always, every time I run into him, he's always on my case to start that we should be getting going on a CWRA Hall of Fame. And I really think it would be such a great thing, but I don't have that work in me. You know what I mean?
Man, it's a lot of fundraising.
A lot. It would take that, and it would, your grandfather moved that at Inclusa or whatever, in Rapids, or they went to the fundraising, the community thing.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, a guy could get involved with that, and it would help, but just the amount of work, and it would take a lot. And then there's so many of the older guys are passing away.
Mm-hmm.
And, I feel real fortunate, and I've told people this. There's not a lot. There wasn't a lot of guys my age was getting into racing at that time. We'd have one or two a year, that would. Mm-hmm. So I feel very fortunate. When I think back, I ran against Sonny Immerfall, Dale Walworth, Johnny McNamara, Ron Backberg. I could go on. Them guys actually started before, like, Tom and Dick. Sonny did. Sonny ran at that track out on 54 in Rapids.
Is that Crowns?
Crowns, yeah. So them guys were still around. They were in their 60s going at it. So I got to run with them. And then Tom and Dick and Marv and Bach and Richie Summers and, Steve Holhausen had started already. Mm-hmm. And you got to run with him. And, I'm fortunate. It's because there isn't a whole lot that are in that connecting, that made that connection. So that's very fortunate. And I don't know, it'd be hard to get a thing, Hall of Fame started, and I think that's the closest what we have there. And, maybe someday there's some other things can be added, like your dad or your grandfather having something, and maybe for Marv and Bach and Brian, because it all came from that area, this Rapids, Rudolph, and but it is a nice thing. Yeah, real good thing.
Yeah, no, it was nice. I didn't make it out there, but it was nice to see that they had a little something. It's a good, the people that come to the event, and it's a good reason other than the races to meet and talk with people and have a good time.
Yeah, they brought up and asked a question if they think they should move the date to look for better weather, but I said just be careful, because then now you're going to start getting into some races and things like that.
Yes.
And then they decided to keep it on that same weekend, which is basically a race-free weekend. And
I think I don't ever remember there being a conflict that way.
So it works out good. So we've had some good weather, some we haven't.
It's Wisconsin, unfortunately.
Yeah, it just. But still a great thing to keep that going. A lot of history there.
Yeah, for sure. So what else you got going on nowadays? Any big races that you're looking forward to this year?
No, it's been quite a few years now. When I started going to the races again, and it was right about the time I probably got that vintage card, but I was still going to the races. Well, I forget, was it Wisconsin Challenge Series or something, and they had a race at Wausau one night.
Yeah.
So I went up there, Rex and I went up there, and this guy, Ryan Farrell's out there racing. First time I ever seen or heard of the guy, and I think he has fast time, runs real good. Next night at Plover, same thing, and I thought, who's this guy, So we're at Club Forest after the races, and this big group comes in, and guy sits next to me, shakes my hand. I am Ryan Farrell. So me and Ryan hit it off right there. So I started backing him a little bit.
Yep.
And now Rick Adams is his major backer.
Mm-hmm.
And so where Ryan's usually racing, I try to go there.
Okay.
And, and him and his family have just become friends.
Okay. He does a lot of the Live for Five, right?
Live for Five. He doesn't race a whole lot. He's an engineer and has a busy job, and his wife is very busy. She's I think runs a pharmacy for one of the hospitals in Milwaukee.
Okay, cool.
And they have 3 little ones. just a busy family life. He's in the process of building a new home, and so I don't know how much we'll see him this year, but he keeps things in perspective.
Mm-hmm.
He races on a budget, and he totally understands. He loves the old history of everything, and so sort of help him out. So anywhere he's racing, I try to get over there and watch him, and we usually have a couple adult beverages after the races, and so just a nice. I don't know if you know him, just a nice guy.
Yeah, I've talked to Ryan a handful of times. Yeah, he's a great guy
just
to talk
a super
to.
guy. He'd be a guy to have for your show because he's a talker.
Sure. And I listened. Talker. I think he was on like the Racing Nuggets podcast a couple of years ago, and like I listened to him talk about how he ended up getting money with the whole the NASCAR gambling. I'm like, oh, that is awesome.
Yeah. No, what is that? DraftKings.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then I'm not sure. I can't remember, but he got hacked. Did he talk about that being hacked?
I don't remember. I don't recall.
So he got he got money on that DraftKings, and then that NASCAR thing. He made a lot of money. And that's all he was racing off of, and he had that stuff protected. But what did he get into? He got into something else, and was making a lot of money, on this this stuff like this. And the Russians, I think the Russians hacked him, and they got a good portion of it. He was able to get it, I think, somewhat stopped. But yeah, Ryan is an interesting character. I mean,
yeah, I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, just isn't. Yeah, he funneled. He kept that racing going on what he was doing there, and he played all the algorithms, and he figured out. Yeah. It's just crazy. So he's a very smart person, and he's like you. He likes with these shocks, and he likes screwing around, and he really into. And there again, these younger people like yourself, you gotta. We can't curtail that. We gotta let that. We gotta keep that in the racing. That's part of racing.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But outside of that, just go to some dirt races and asphalt races. I'll try to get to everything here. I go to Nashville every year for that big race there. I'm probably going to try to get over to Michigan, maybe to Berlin for. They got that Run for the Money race or something.
Yeah, is it Show Me the Money?
Show Me the Money race. Okay. I'm thinking of going to that. But I'll get to all the specials around here, and and then I winter in Florida, so I head there in October, and so when it gets cold here, I head out.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, gosh, Royce, I appreciate all those stories, and it's like I said, I know, asking those tough questions, hey, what would you change about racing? But it is sure nice to, hear those stories and perspectives from, what was going on at some of those, peak racing periods, I would call them, and just hear a different side of how things operated, and I think it's good. It's good for people to hear and be reminded of.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, you're spot on that. I got one little story I got to tell. Donnie Fowler's going to probably watch this. And his dad owned a lot of cars.
Okay.
A lot of people drove for Don's dad. So, and he helped me out a couple of times when my car was crashed out. I'd get one of their cars and keep racing. But anyways, so Donnie and I raced at the same time.
Okay.
We're close to the same age. I'm just a tad older. And so we always would laugh, like all the posters would say, come see Dick Trickle, Tom Reffner, Jim Bach, Marv,
Yep.
And then it'd say plus many more. Well, Donnie told me one night, he said, we're many more. He said, so if anybody ever asks, just say, yeah, I'm on every poster, and, they're advertising us. And,
sure.
And I tell that people this day, and it's usually a pretty good laugh. I said, yeah, I was known as many more when I was racing. So, yeah, if Donnie, I'm sure, is going to watch us.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's funny.
Yeah.
Yeah, many more.
Yeah. Yeah. Or it'd say also running or something like that. You'd always say, well, we're also running on this one,
Yeah.
Yeah, good times. Yeah, good family.
Well, any other last stories you want to throw in?
Nope. Colin, I just appreciate, you got a great thing here.
I appreciate
it. Keep it rolling, and you've had The guests you've had on are just, I mean, all of them. Chris Weinkauf's stories were just great. How, a guy with no money, and Tom Ress. I can remember Tom helping Mark when he was just a little guy, and Pat Barrett, and all of them. Father Grubas and Ronnie's. Ronnie's was a great story, and all of them. Just now, Cody, I didn't know Cody Hubert.
Yep.
So I'm about an hour into his show. So when I at a race I know he's at, I'm going to go and introduce myself to him, because a very good story that was up to so far.
Yeah, if you're only an hour in, it's a hoot all the way through.
Yeah, just a great guy, and how he presents himself. And, I thought maybe he drove trucks. I couldn't quite remember.
He did like 4 or 5 years ago.
Okay,
yep.
So then I sort of remember him from that, I think, and I was trying to remember.
He's got the number 20 with a chick on it, so.
Okay.
Yeah, we talk a little bit about that.
Okay, yeah,
so.
But just all of them have just been just great deals. Ronnie's was a good one. You talk about a pioneer in racing.
Yeah,
exactly. I forgot to mention him. I got to race with Ronnie. And,
yeah, I would imagine you're right.
Yeah, and I was the president when he had that accident at La Crosse. I mean, I have told people, but I told people before that, Ronnie, pound for pound, was the toughest racer I knew. For a little guy in the size of his arms, and he was just one tough little son of a gun. And I don't think Ronnie talked about this, but he was running a little salvage yard up there and off Tommy's Turnpike in Whiting.
Okay. No,
before he did the thing, and he dropped the transmission on his arm and severely damaged his arm. I think it was his right arm. And he didn't run all that summer, but he still made it to Plover at least, and maybe Was and that. And I remember he made a little thing where they tied the right arm up on the roll bar.
Gosh, no kidding.
And he drove that car, and them were no power steering. These things were tanks. They were probably 3,600-pound cars with no power steering, big 8-bolt rear ends,
Yeah.
And he drove that car. I mean, that's just to tell you how tough that guy is.
Yeah, if I can be half as tough as him at his age, I'll be happy.
Yeah, that accident was just. It was just something that wedge of that wall basically tore that cage off that car.
Yeah.
The top of the cage, and him being a wiry little guy, more or less got shoved down to the floor of the car. The seat bent basically in half, and shoved him down in the floor of that car. I mean, a miracle. And then and he was out at the trickle thing in the shape that he's in, and just a tough son of a gun. I forgot to mention him. One of the guys that guess he was around from day one there.
Right.
And just a good guy.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you listening to all those episodes, because it's
I listen to them all.
And just like you said, you don't know a guy much about Cody Hubert. Well, I mean, his story about getting into racing is fascinating, and it's awesome, and a person has a lot of appreciation for it. And I heard actually, I think it just got released today, so today is the 22nd of May. And they just released the new Dale Earnhardt documentary. So they're doing 4 episodes. I think it's on Amazon Prime. They're doing 2 episodes today and then 2 episodes next week, I think. And I was listening to Dale Earnhardt Jr. talk, and it was one of the coolest things I've heard someone say. And he was talking about, I was always really worried about his dad's legacy, Earnhardt Sr.'s legacy fading away, new people coming to the sport, not remembering it. And he's like, well, the thing with this documentary, he's like, people are still asking, well, who's this Dale Sr. guy? Who's this Dale Sr. guy?
Sure,
And
they don't know.
And he's like, I'm really hoping with this documentary, it can introduce new fans to, hey, this is who Dale Sr. was, and I think we know the name, Dale Sr. and Do It for Dale or whatever, that'll probably never go away. But that was part of it was being able to reintroduce, introduce new people to, hey, this is Dale Earnhardt, and I think that's, with, some of the people that that are still around and I'm able to have on here and whether it's, obviously I'm not able to have Albert on here, but,
Sure.
people like you are able to come on here and talk about them. That's what I want. I want people to, whether they didn't know a story about someone that they did know, or if it's, someone that knows nothing at all about someone, they can, learn and be introduced to that person.
Right.
I think that's what I just kind of continually hope and want, because there is, so much cherishable history, around here, and there will continually to be. So,
Yeah.
I just want to make sure that's always possible.
You're doing it good, and boy, you have a great setup and
we'll try and keep improving it. And
you're doing good. I'm proud to, like I said, the guests that you've had on and to be included in that, and like I said, all the stories of Kirby's stories. One Kirby one though that I'm hoping he's watching.
Yes, please.
Yeah, because we're gonna burn him. So, Kirby once in a while would get a little lax maintaining his cars. You know what I mean? And he might tell you that, but
maybe he'd even admit it today.
Yeah, I think he might admit it.
He's got a lot of cars.
So this was years ago. I don't know if I was running my late model yet. I think I was. Definitely he was there, and Marv and Tom and Dick was on his case because he was leaking oil.
Okay.
And he leaked oil for about 2 or 3 weeks. Of course, now you're running with him. He's spilling oil all over you at lacrosse. So this went on. So I think it was Marv or your grandfather. I think it was Marv. Marv brought this big bed sheet. And they tied like a big diaper on Kirby's car at Wausau. Yeah, they wrapped. I don't know if anybody has pictures of that, but
if you do, please send them to me.
Yeah, but that was one thing with Kirby there, and then he fixed his leak there. I think he got the hint that now everybody's seeing they're making fun of him, and but
fantastic.
Kirby's stories and good racer and he had a lot of, when I was the president there, we had a good run in there. Your dad, and Kirby, and Rex, and Rory Melbinger, Kevin Peterson, Bobby Weiss. Brian would be at some of them shows. Tough racing, So,
right.
But Kirby, we have to keep him honest now and then. So
yeah, someone's got it, right?
So hopefully he's watching.
Yeah, I hope so too. If not, we'll make a little clip out of that and we'll put it out there so he's got to see it.
Yeah.
Well, Royce, I appreciate you coming and all the stories. And in the last couple hours, the associates haven't had a leader, so we'll get you back to the associates.
We got to do that. Yeah.
So, all right. Thanks, Royce. Appreciate it.
Thank you for listening in on another episode of Speed and Grease. And if it was your first episode, I really appreciate you checking us out, checking out Speed and Grease, seeing what we're all about, listening to our amazing guests and their fantastic stories. And if you like the show, if you got some laughs out of it, even if you didn't like the show, thank you for joining us, taking that time. If you're not, wherever you like to listen in, check out, cool things that we're posting, whether it's on Facebook, Instagram, X, YouTube, Spotify, Apple, wherever, Amazon Music. Give us a like, follow us, leave a comment, a rating. Really appreciate it. Really helps the show get noticed and helps spread the word and keep these stories out there. And the more people that can hear these great stories, the better. Spreading as Jerry Guiley would say, spreading the gospel of racing, and just want to keep it moving. So thank you for listening.